through the front door of number 10. I think it was through the front door. Could he be returning to frontline politics as Foreign Secretary? Because we think James Cleverly's moved from Foreign Secretary to Home Secretary. He could do that by creating a peerage for him in the House of Lords. That would be the first Foreign Secretary in the House of Lords since Lord Carrington, who resigned after the Falklands were invaded by the Argentinians in 1982.
So when we were talking on Thursday, and we said we might come on Monday, and maybe Mark Rowley might have had to resign because of events over the weekend, we didn't think that this was going to be the change in personnel that we would be discussing. I'm particularly fascinated about this David Cameron appointment.
Amazing.
Who saw that coming? If somebody had said to you last night, if Suella Braverman goes, who's going to step in, would you have had David Cameron in your top 5?
And as I looked at him standing outside the Cenotaph yesterday, alongside the Prime Minister, the former Prime Ministers, Major was there, Theresa May, Liz Truss, it didn't occur to me for a second that the next day he could be walking into number 10, potentially as our new Foreign Secretary.
Do you think this has been bubbling away in the background, or do you reckon they agreed it over tea and cake yesterday afternoon?
No, this would have been talked about for a long time. But what I find particularly interesting, in his conference speech a few weeks ago, the party conference, Rishi Sunak trashed the last 30 years of political conventionality, orthodoxy. 6 of those were David Cameron's premiership.
Rishi Sunak has sold himself to you as the change candidate to be Prime Minister. He said he is the new Conservatives. And as Andrew, that's such a great observation. How does bringing David Cameron into such a senior role mean that there is any change? Let us know what you think this morning. GBNews at gbnews.com. We're seeing live pictures here outside number 10. Would Suella Braverman be made to go in there today and have her knuckles wrapped?
No, it could have been done on the phone. She could have gone in. She could have gone through the back door. He could have done it in the he could have done it in his Commons office too. But I don't think she's anywhere near number 10.
Well, we've got all the right people in all the right places this morning. Christopher Hope is going to be at Westminster for us. Mark White is heading, I believe, to the Home Office. We've got a whole list of experts coming into the studio this morning. Piers Pottinger's with us in the studio to look at this in just a moment. And I think we're waiting to see if David Cameron leaves number 10. If he does, Andrew, he won't make any sort of statement.
I'd be surprised. It's up to the Prime Minister to say something. But that is one of these jaw-dropping moments. Well, I think we can talk to Piers Pottinger. Piers, you and I have known some reshuffles in our time.
Yeah.
You didn't see it coming. I didn't see it coming. David Cameron going in, it must be a job.
It must be, I'm sure. And there's more than one precedence for this. William Hague, of course, and earlier, Alec Douglas-Home. I think Cameron would be a superb Foreign Secretary. Like you, I've known him for some time and I admire him as a person immensely. I thought sometimes his political judgment was lacking, but I think he'll be an excellent Foreign Secretary because he's still in touch with and knows a lot of these leaders.
He does.
And he, as you again pointed out, his age, he's going to be very good. I think
57.
The most interesting thing, though, is what's going to happen after the autumn statement on November the 22nd. I think probably on Wednesday, first of all, we'll have the Supreme Court say no to the government's plans.
So that's the Rwanda appeal.
The Rwanda appeal. And I suspect the government may already have had notice of this, which might have strengthened Sunak's hand in sacking Suella. But the key thing is, after the autumn statement, if Hunt gives nothing back to the people, anything that's going to be an election winner, or even hinting that in March next year he will look at doing something about taxes. If he doesn't budge from his very strong position at the moment, I think Rishi might well remove him, because the Conservatives need something very positive to have any chance at all.
I think he'll do something on inheritance tax.
I think inheritance tax,
because Labour will attack it. So it'll be clear blue water.
But inheritance tax, I don't think is anything like the big vote winner as they do. I think it affects a very small percentage. But if we're looking at the red wall constituencies, for example, we need something much meatier. Whether it's raising the threshold, lowering the rate of corporation tax, those kind of things. But if there's no sign of that from the autumn statement, I think Hunt is in real trouble.
Can we just reflect a bit on how we've got to this stage at 9:34 on Monday morning, the steps that have led to Suella Braverman getting the push this morning. She wrote this controversial piece in the Times newspaper last week. We thought when we were on air that she'd had clearance from Number 10, and now we understand that she hadn't had that cleared.
It had been cleared with some amendments, but she didn't put the amendments. She didn't use the amendments. She ignored them.
And she might say, anyone who's worked with newspapers, we know occasionally edits fall through the net, perhaps. Maybe a sub-editor didn't see it and it didn't get in. So perhaps that's been going on behind the scenes.
But when it comes to Number 10...
I think it's more than that.
I think actually, she was willful.
Rishi has proved himself to be a braver man himself today than many would have thought, because I personally didn't think he would have the nerve to sack her, because she does have quite a strong following with the voters. Not so much the backbenchers, but certainly with the voters, she's got a strong following. And there's no question that most of what she said about the demonstrations at the weekend was exactly right.
Except that, of course, she suggested the police would handle far-right protesters differently to how they would handle left-wing or Palestinian protesters. As it happens, the majority of the rioting and the arrests were from the right-wing.
Yeah, well, they did handle them differently. I mean, they had a big punch-up. I mean, it was like a kind of Peaky Blinders mob, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And they were dreadful, of course, for that. But actually, the Palestinian demonstration, so-called, was actually an anti-Semite demonstration.
It was. The biggest one we've ever had in Britain.
And absolutely shocking that it was allowed to happen. And as for that photograph of the two policemen with the child dressed in a Hamas mask, bandana, I mean, absolutely shocking. And if that isn't an indication that the police are not dealing with these marches properly, and we've had 5 marches now.
They've got the power now. So if someone has a sign saying Gaza, the new Auschwitz, that's a hate crime.
Of course it is.
And whoever had that placard should have been arrested.
Of course.
The woman who was chanting into a video camera, death to all Jews.
Yes.
How has she not been apprehended already?
No, and a lot of the placards, which incidentally seem to be made by the same people, if you look at them, they're mass-produced by... it'd be very interesting to know who's producing those, because that's criminal as well.
I think there was, to be honest, I think there was a minority on both sides that were breaking the law and that were peddling hate. I was at the start of the march on Saturday. I happened to be dropping my 14-year-old at the ice rink at Hyde Park. And from what I could see, many of those pro-Palestine protesters were middle-class white people that were wearing the hiking clothes they might normally go to the National Trust property on a weekend. There was a lot of that. And I do think that actually the trouble is how it flared up on the weekend was the thugs. It was the thugs outside Downing Street, sadly. And that's probably what's done for Suella Braverman.
But I still think that's why, if the organisers had a shred of decency, they'd have just cancelled it.
Yes.
Because we shouldn't be talking about this. We should be talking about the sombre...
There was no need for the march to be
we should have been talking about sombre
on Armistice Day. There was no need for that.
And
they've already had 4 before.
Yeah, I know.
And there comes a point. The other thing is the sit-in...
They could have done the march today.
Sit-in in Victoria Station, where these people abused Michael Gove and also forced poppy sellers to move. Since when... railway stations, centres for demonstrations, and they've sat in many railway stations,
Liverpool Street,
causing chaos. Why are they not cleared out of the stations immediately?
But looking again to why she's been sacked, what Rishi Sunak has obviously concluded, your article at the weekend, for which you were criticised for inciting hate, did what I suspected it might do. And we had
Downing Street doors opening. We had
a lot of the
on the radio.
We had a lot of the aggressive men who I'm interested in why they feel so disenfranchised in society now, why they felt so angry about their lives, that they were literally pushing the police at the cordons at Downing Street. And Rishi Sunak has said, right, Suella, you are responsible for this. That's what's happened here, surely.
Well, I think that, you see, until... If David Cameron has been made Foreign Secretary, until that moment, and just sacking Suella is a victory for Keir Starmer and the dreadful Sadiq Khan.
I agree.
And that makes Rishi look very weak. So he's had to do something else in order to strengthen the perception of him amongst particularly the right-of-centre voters. And Cameron is probably as good an answer as he's going to get.
Is this also because of Rishi Sunak's unpopularity? You were saying last week about the polls of potential leaders or of Conservative MPs, and he's like number 23.
In the Conservative home, they do a monthly poll of ministers. He is 23rd. It's astonishing for a Tory leader to be so not loved by his own membership.
He's not loved. He's not liked. He's not an easy man to love or like because he's not a warm person.
He's not a natural leader.
He's not a natural communicator. No. I think he's extremely efficient. I think he's very thoughtful. I think he's a man of integrity. All of these things. But unfortunately, he doesn't click with the general public.
No.
Mind you, neither does Keir Starmer.
No, and he had his big chance to reset with his Conservative Party conference speech. That didn't work. And then we had the King's speech last week. And I was only saying to a friend yesterday, what's the King's speech only last week? Because it's gone.
It's completely forgotten.
It's evaporated already.
It had nothing new in it, nothing of any substance. No. And again, he's got a limited amount of time anyway. Whoever's in these new jobs isn't going to have very long, a year at most, to do to do anything.
So is that why David Cameron has suddenly been plucked out of obscurity again? Because some polling has shown that he is a popular Conservative man?
I think the Prime Minister is alive to the criticism that he has a cabinet which is full of some pretty small bits, it's a cabinet full of pygmies, frankly.
Yes.
And whatever you think about and I disagreed with him fundamentally on Brexit, and I had arguments with David Cameron for years. He's got gravitas and stature. He's a former Prime Minister. He looks the part. He sounds the part. And he'll be a good Foreign Secretary.
And he knows.
And you need a big Foreign Secretary. He does.
And I mean, he would be a natural, in my view, in the job. But again, I think other cabinet members like Coffey, for example, goodness knows what on earth she's doing.
Well, she's still there.
And the wonderful Education Secretary, Queen of Concrete.
Yes,
I mean, I think she might find the concrete is sticking to her feet.
But here's the thing: if Cameron is Foreign Secretary in the Lords, could he really, if Rishi Sunak, if they lose the Tory party lose the elections, it looks like, could he run for leader from the House of Lords? Well, we haven't had a Prime Minister from the House of Lords for a very, very long time. We have to go back to someone like Lord Salisbury.
Yes, well, and of course you can revoke the peerage, as Alec Douglas-Hume did when he became Prime Minister.
Yeah.
But, yes, I mean, it's theoretically anything is possible at the moment.
Because he thought he was going to be PM for a very long time. He was up against Jeremy Corbyn, ghastly, useless, but he flounced out over Brexit.
Yeah, I mean, there will be people saying Suella is going to now really step up to try and become leader of the party. I don't think she's got any chance.
And it won't be before the election.
And I'm also told that Kemi Badenoch has fallen out with Rishi, and later on today I wouldn't be surprised if she perhaps returns to her old job.
So how much reshuffling do you think we should expect today?
Well, I mean, I don't think...
just those two positions?
No, Coffey will go. I think Therese Coffey will go. I think others could go. Look, if this is his last big chance to reset the government, we can talk to Chris Hope, who's outside Number 10. Chris Hope, our political editor. Chris, morning.
Move.
Are you there, Chris?
How are you?
We're very well, Chris. Now, do you know what's going on in there with David Cameron?
I think he's about to be made Foreign Secretary, Andrew. It's basically like you and I going back to the old days, isn't it, in the 2010s? I mean, we think he's back in government. That probably will necessitate a peerage for him, and along the lines of Lord Carrington back in the early 80s during the time of the Falklands War. We're pretty sure he's about to be made Foreign Secretary. James Cleverly is confirmed as Home Secretary.
Nobody saw this one coming, Chris. We all like to pride ourselves. We read all these endless speculations about reshuffles. Nobody saw that coming, even though he was standing outside the cenotaph only yesterday.
If you've been around as long as I have, Andrew, you've written most stories before, and I wrote this story in 2017 for The Telegraph. The idea had been then that he could come back as a peer, as Foreign Secretary. But back then, I think the issue with Brexit was so raw, it was too soon for him to come back. But I think, as you've been saying on air, Andrew, he's someone who is respected in the party, has more to give. I think is a secret Brexiteer, by the way, more than Boris Johnson was anyway. I think he's someone who can give a bit of grown-upness to the operation in 10 Downing Street behind me.
He also, we've got Piers Pottinger. He's a consummate performer on the TV and the radio too, and a cabinet shorn of people who are not consummate performers. Chris.
Yes, totally. I think he's someone who's been around and knows how things are done. I mean, the role of Foreign Secretary is not really a political role, is it, Andrew? It's one where you're on planes, you're around the. I'm just looking at my shoulder in case he might appear at any point, or even James Cleverly might appear behind me. If that happens, I'll break away. Yeah, but yes, exactly right. It's a role which is a chief diplomat's job. It's not really a political job in the same way. You're out there batting for Britain. He's someone who's had real experience, I think, since he stood down as Prime Minister. He had an issue there with his finances, which was a problem for him, but he's got past that. A big campaign on dementia, Alzheimer's, but he's shown, I think, hasn't really been able to make a big lots of money in the private sector that we know about, therefore. So I think he's a chance for him to come back, unfinished business, I think is the way you describe it.
Piers Potter's here. Foreign Secretary is a hugely important role at the moment. We've got a war in Ukraine, war in the Middle East. They still haven't sorted Brexit. There's still ramifications from Brexit.
Absolutely, and of course, also with Gaza and the Middle East, Cameron is a steady hand, a sure hand, and he is someone who I think will make a superb diplomat.
What does this mean now? I'm just thinking about looking forward to this week. We've got the Supreme Court decision on Wednesday about Rwanda. Having James Cleverly in charge of that department now means that what? Regardless of if they lose that case on Wednesday, which we're suspecting maybe they've had a whiff that that's what's going to happen, James Cleverly can be there and not have to take any responsibility.
That's right.
He will say, well, this was nothing to do with me. I'm new to this department, so I have to now come up with what? A plan B. It's quite a clever way of shifting.
Yeah, and also, you see, if they did the reshuffle later, and the government loses Rwanda, the Home Secretary, could have resigned on a point of principle on Wednesday, and then he's lost his chance to sack her, so he would have been in control. We're going back to Chris Hope again. Chris Hope back in number 10 down. So, Chris, the latest? Any more comings and goings?
Well, I think James Cleverly, the new Home Secretary, is about to appear behind me. He's someone who is a real campaigning minister. When he was party chairman, he was the minister for the Today programme. He's somebody who I think can talk the language of the party grassroots. He can actually impress, I think, with his sound conservative values. Of course, he looked at running for London Mayor back in the day. It's certainly a big moment for him. I mean, I think Foreign Secretary is a great officer of state. Look at my shoulder in case he appears right now. As Foreign Secretary is a great officer of state. But I think Home Secretary is one where the election will be fought or lost next year, and that's why I think this is a real sign here that Mr Sunak is bringing a team here who wants to try and take the fight on the same team as well, fight together against Keir Starmer.
And Chris, there'll also be the view that Cleverly will be on the same side as the Prime Minister, whereas Braverman often appeared to be deliberately at odds with her own Prime Minister.
But Cleverly will have...
Exactly. I think he's more in tune with where the party will be and where the PM will be, and that's why he's been brought back in. He's someone who is confident, can talk with confidence, I think, and impress the base. But he's not. His politics aren't in the same way as Solid Braverman aren't out there. He's not seen as a standard bearer for the right in the same way. Issues are remaining. We're seeing already on my WhatsApp feeds lots of angry people on the right saying, "Where's our person gone? Where has Solid Braverman gone?" I'm not sure James Cleverly matches that. So bring in James Cleverly and maybe as Home Secretary, and maybe David Cameron's Foreign Secretary won't do enough to allay the right, and we might see the big row tomorrow could be what on earth have the right got left in this party.
Would you expect to see any more positions shuffled around today, Chris?
Well, there are rumours. Right now, these are two big movements. It's the Foreign Secretary and Home Secretary. Other moves may happen. Theresa Coffey, of course, and the Environment Secretary, she may be off. Alistair Jack, the Scottish Secretary, who is standing down at the next election. Maybe even Steve Barclay at Health, he could be on the way. It depends how far and wide he wants to go. And, of course, the big one is, of course, Jeremy Hunt as Chancellor. He's the accidental Chancellor, appointed by Liz Truss, kept on by Rishi Sunak. Will he go? Very unlikely, given we've got the autumn statement next year. And maybe he might go after the spring budget if he goes at all.
Yeah.
All right, Chris. Chris, stay there with us because we want to keep what's going. Is James Cleverly turning into potential next future Tory leader?
He could be. I mean, I think the key thing is if the Rwanda decision goes the way we think, i.e. against the government, he's got to have a plan quickly because immigration is still the number one issue on the doorstep on the hustings. Everywhere they're talking about, this was a big commitment by Sunak about about immigration.
It's one of his 5 pledges, isn't it?
One of his 5 pledges, and the one that is most sensitive in terms of votes. And cleverly, I mean, I don't know what he's going to come up with, but he hasn't got long to come up with something.
I wonder if they've already devised something just into... We're going back to number 10 now. Somebody leaving number 10? That does not look like a cabinet minister. We're going back to Chris. Every time, Chris, that door opens, we're going to ask you what's happening, I'm afraid. Chris.
Yes, totally, Andrew. Yes, totally, Andrew. I think James Cleverly is about to appear. And of course, as you say, I think this will do his attempt, or his hopes maybe, of replacing Rishi Sunak. If the party lose the election at the next year, then it will do no harm at all. So we'll wait and see. I'm half looking over my shoulder in case he appears to shout the questions which GBNews viewers want to hear answered. Let's see, no, that's not the Home Secretary.
That is a photographer.
That's not the Home Secretary.
So who's he been taking photographs of?
Quite. Who's just had their official new profile picture?
Yeah,
here we go. Here's James Cleverly now.
Right.
Mr. Cleverly, how will you stop the boat, Mr. Cleverly? Hello, James. How will you stop the boat?
He's walking very slowly for the cameras, as they do.
No briefcase, no coat.
Mr. Cleverly, how will you stop the boat?
Casual.
And he's getting in his government car, which is a sign he's not been sacked, because he wouldn't have a government car.
Is that right? You have to go out and hail him an Uber?
Yeah, very quickly. Nothing so humiliating as being sacked.
He's right.
Now, what we want to know is that car going to the Home Office? I suspect it is. That's his ministerial car, and there'll be 2 or 3 in the car because he's got a lot of security. So that's the Home Secretary, we're pretty sure, is the James Cleverly. Chris, he wouldn't say anything, but bar humbug.
No, I was asking him the only question that matters in terms of Tory politics. How will you stop the boats, Mr. Cleverly? In his in tray right now is a ruling by the Supreme Court on Wednesday, which will say whether the government can go ahead with Rishi Sunak's plan. Don't forget the PM's plan to process illegal arrivals here in Rwanda. That's what he's worrying about, and he'll see maybe early sight or get a feel for what the ONS will say on net migration figures next Thursday next week. 2 massive things in his in tray. There might even be an urgent question in the House of Commons today when Mr. Cleverly will be asked about how the Home Office reacted and behaved towards these protests the weekend. A lot on, and there we go. That's the new Home Secretary leaving right now for the Home Office over in Marsham Street here in Westminster.
Here's the thing. Suella Braverman was very much, as we've been discussing on here lots of times, she seemed to be a clear Brexiteer. She seemed to be the one lone voice that was very much in favour of strong borders and less immigration and taking a hard line on the boats. Who's left now? Because this looks like a victory for the Liberal media who didn't like what she said in the Times last week, and for those politicians who don't want to hear those sorts of messages. Who's left to speak that sort of rhetoric, Piers, and to appeal to those voters?
Well, Kemi is one. But
she's
as I've
fallen
said,
out with
well, I'm being told that she is not. She's suddenly fallen out with Rishi, and I don't know quite why. There's also Penny Mordaunt, and of course, I'm sure if there's any leadership contest, she'll be back in that. But again, their voices are not that strong. They're not heard that often. And again, I doubt that they have quite the appeal with the public. And Cleverly has got to actually do something clever. And he's got, as Chris Hope has just said, a big in tray. And it could be... and he hasn't got time to sort of talk about reviews, hold committees, inquiries, which is what they all love doing, consultation. He's got to actually say, right, we've had this rejected by the Supreme Court, we've got to do this, and by the way, when it comes to the marches, we're going to do X. And they've got to do something, because we cannot have continuous anti-Semite protests on our streets. It is really shocking.
But if the wretched Supreme Court does block this, there'll be fury in the country, I think, because I think it's not the ideal, but it was a solution. And lots of other countries in Europe now are catching up. Greece and Denmark and
Italy.
Even Germany's now thinking they've got to do something. So we were probably ahead of the game here.
Immigration is the biggest issue in the whole of Europe. And I mean, France...
And Labour have got no solution at all.
France has had 28 immigration bills in the last 10 years.
Yeah, and what much good it's done.
It's the #1 issue in France.
Yeah, it is.
And even Marine Le Pen in France is now coming out to criticise anti-Semite protests in France, which is extraordinary for her party.
I know.
Just fast forward for me here. So if we have an election in May next year, and I think we all agree that's looking less and less likely, do you think that's unlikely, Piers?
I think it's very unlikely. I think it'll be at the last possible moment.
October, November.
And Rishi needs as much possible time to try and turn things around, even though I think it's a hopeless task.
OK, so if we have an election next autumn, which is actually, it's nearly a year away now. So where will Suella Braverman be by then, if we have a little crystal ball?
Well, she will be on the back benches. She may join a think tank. She'll be writing articles. She'll be writing pamphlets about the direction of the Tory party.
Will she be a thorn in his side?
Without a doubt.
The next year?
Without a doubt. But she has to be. They've got to be careful. She mustn't be seen as doing a running commentary, which is critical of Rishi Sunak. She's got to be a constructive critic.
Yeah, because
she has to be.
British people don't like bad losers. And sour grapes only goes so far.
Yeah.
And we've seen politician after politician, ex-minister after ex-minister, play the sour grapes card and then disappear into oblivion.
Yeah, exactly.
If she then wins her seat in next autumn, where would she be in terms of making or trying to become leader of the Conservative Party? If there's a Labour victory but she wins her seat, what then?
Well, the Conservatives, if they lose the election, Rishi will probably stand down in a few months.
Immediately.
Immediately, and there'll be a leadership contest. They'll pick a leader within 2 to 3 months, and she'll put her name forward.
Yes.
Without a doubt. I suspect Mr Cleverly will. I suspect Penny Mordaunt will, again. Kemi Badenoch, again. Michael Gove will not, would be my view.
And I think they may well change the way the leader is chosen.
So it's just decided by MPs?
So that MPs have more of a say. And that it is less dependent on the membership, who can be misguided, as we saw with Liz Truss.
And if Rishi Sunak doesn't manage to stop the boats, or now James Cleverly doesn't have much impact in that area, Suella Braverman will be perfect position to say, if only you'd kept me in the job, I was the only one who had the strong rhetoric about immigration, I would have stopped them. And there will be a large contingent of people who like her for that.
I think she's very popular behind the red wall, which is where...
I think she is very popular there. I mean, the problem is that the party is divided. This phrase, Tory rebels, is the death knell for the party because, as I keep saying, nobody ever votes for a divided party. And the more that the Labour Party can make the Conservatives look split, even though they are in a much worse position, incidentally, than the Conservatives. They are very heavily split. But the more the Conservatives look split, the more sour grapes people on the back benches, the better it is for Starmer.
If you're listening on the radio, we've just got pictures now of James Cleverly, the new Home Secretary, arriving at the Home Office. I don't know who that chap is trying to talk to him, but he's on his own. He's walking very slowly. He knows the cameras are fixed on him, of course. There's lots of cameras fixed on him. An awful lot of cameras. And he looks like he's going to do a chat. He's going to do it's what we call a doorstep chat. So we'll have a listen to what the new Home Secretary is about to say. Here we go. Doesn't look like we've got any audio, but as soon as the Home Secretary starts to speak, he is speaking, but we haven't got audio. So that's confirmed. That's confirmed, Piers. He is the Home Secretary, and he's...
That's a little unusual, isn't it? To go from being given the job to straight to the office.
It shows they can't hang around.
Doesn't it? I mean, this is... And apologies, we haven't got the audio. We will bring it to you eventually, but this was an unanticipated move in this chain of events. Who'd have thought so quickly he'd be talking to the press?
I suspect he knew yesterday.
That he knew this was going to happen yesterday?
I suspect 1 or 2 people knew. Wouldn't you agree, Piers?
I think they must have done.
The major players who are being moved.
And I mean...
she won't have. Braverman won't have.
No, but he will have known. And as we've said, he's you know, he hasn't got the luxury of any time to acclimatise. He's right in there, and he's got to get moving right away.
And he also couldn't have gone into Number 10 this morning and the Prime Minister said, I want to be Home Secretary. He says, thanks very much, Prime Minister, but I'm not moving.
No, exactly.
That would be problematic. problematic. So that would all have been signed off. The Cameron thing would have been signed off yesterday too. And Braverman would have been told this morning because she'd have leaked it.
Yes.
David Cameron coming back in just always makes me think of Brexit, of course, because it was effectively him being concerned about the UKIP vote.
Well, he was useless, and he got it all wrong.
And he genuinely believed that we wouldn't vote for Brexit.
Arrogant. Project Fear.
Well, of course, you know who I want to talk to this morning, but he's just arrived in Australia to go in the jungle, is Nigel Farage. And I would love to know what he's making of this morning, because, of course, he was the person who forced David Cameron to call that referendum.
Well, Suella could be joining him in the jungle, actually. He might be a mystery guest.
What did Cameron say of UKIP? It's full of fruitcakes, swivel-eyed loons and homophobes. It was a pretty offensive thing to say, actually.
And there's a man who had George Osborne as his Chancellor.
Yeah.
And George Osborne...
Please don't say he's coming back.
Well, hopefully not.
Stick to the British Museum,
and
George.
I hope his influence is not going to still show itself with Cameron, because I think Cameron's big mistake was Osborne, quite frankly.
And they were just stuck together like glue.
They did, and because Cameron's nothing if not loyal as a person, and I mean I'm as I said, a great admirer of David Cameron, and I think he'll be a superb Foreign Secretary.
I have to say, my overriding memory of one of, I think, the best terms of government was David Cameron and Nick Clegg. I look back on that as a very successful partnership, and I think, as somebody that kind of, I remember thinking at the time that there were lots of very sensible, quite centrist decisions being made, and the majority of people in this country would probably see themselves politically somewhere centrist.
Well, I don't agree about Nick Clegg, I'm sorry.
No, I agree.
Because all the Lib Dems in the government, in the coalition, were disastrous.
Yeah.
Don't forget, Vince Cable and Ed Davey were responsible. Ed Davey was Minister for the Post Office.
Yes.
And he signed off on the biggest miscarriage of British justice in history, of those poor sub-postmasters.
Yeah, he did.
And for something for which he's never properly apologised. And neither, of course, is the dreadful Vince Cable. No, anyway, the Lib Dems, have we heard anything from them recently about anything?
No.
Not that there's much going on in the world. We hear nothing from them.
And my worry about the coalition was that David Cameron seemed to be more comfortable in the company of the Lib Dem lead and also with some of his own Tory MPs.
He was a little bit to blame for the Conservatives losing their conservatism, but that was unfortunately forced on him by the coalition, because he had to give a little bit of ground to the ghastly Lib Dems, which has got us nowhere. And now he's got to show that he's actually a proper Conservative Foreign Secretary. And he's now on the world stage as a statesman again.
We've just seen a clip of Therese Coffey walking up 10 Downing Street.
Well, please don't say she's getting another job.
These are live pictures. Here we go. Chris Hope.
So we've got Chris Hope in number 10. Outside number 10.
I can confirm that David Cameron is the new Foreign Secretary, but as I'm speaking, Therese Coffey, who's the Environment Secretary, is walking up the street here. Can you see that? Why are you in number 10, Miss Coffey?
Oh, she stopped us.
It's the Downing Street cat.
Promotion?
It can't be a promotion, surely. Please sack this woman.
Why? What does she do that's so bad?
Well, what does she do ever?
What's your
She was an unlikely health secretary,
Environment Secretary.
Well,
she's a very unpopular local MP in
I gather. Now, I don't. It's news to me if they're going to bring people in to sack them, because more and more they do that behind the scenes.
They normally do it in the parliamentary office.
The parliamentary office, so nobody sees
it.
Street, but we have got it confirmed that David Cameron is the new Foreign Secretary, and I suspect he's gone out the back door.
Probably.
Why would he do that?
Because he doesn't want it to be all about him, and there's a reshuffle going on. But we've got Chris Hope back, so it's definitely David Cameron, Chris.
I think David Cameron's going to walk alongside me here any moment, Andrew, not out the back door. He's now the new Foreign Secretary. And
hang on, door's opening.
There's a way through Downing Street to the Foreign Secretary. No, that's the cat going in, Andrew.
That's the cat going back indoors. Very important.
Stay calm, Andrew.
Things right, you know.
But Andrew, you are right to say it's interesting, isn't it, that we've got Therese Coffey walking in through the front door. Normally, if you get sacked, you don't get a meeting through the front door with the Prime Minister. So it suggests maybe Therese Coffey may have a new role in government. We don't know what it is, and she was tipped by many people, including me, to be removed from government in this reshuffle. That may not be the case, and maybe normally the sackings are done behind the scenes in the PM's office back in Parliament, where people like me can't see and shout cheeky questions at them. So let's wait and see how that one ends up. But we are waiting imminently for David Cameron, the comeback of all comebacks, to walk past us here as new Foreign Secretary and take his seat in King Charles Street, surely a few yards away from where I'm standing. No sign yet, but it is quite interesting, I think. This is
He's going to have to get himself to the House of Lords, Chris, a bit quick, because he's going to have to be ennobled, because otherwise he's got no platform on which he can be Foreign Secretary. So presumably the peerage will be created today. We're going to see him dressed up in his ermine.
Yes, well, it'll be created today, won't it? And then he'll be introduced to the House of Lords in his ermine at some point this week, and he'll start work. I think it's a great comeback for him. It's someone I think I agree with what Piers Pottinger says. I think he's a good appointment. He'll bring calmness. I think the world is so uncertain at the moment with Ukraine and the battles between Israel and Hamas. I think you need to have someone like David Cameron, a senior figure on the world stage, a statesman. I think James Cleverly did a great job, no question. He was criticised by some people for being too keen on photo opportunities. I didn't agree with that. I think he was very visible and a good Foreign Secretary. But I think that David Cameron will bring calmness to an area. I think that the world feels more uncertain than ever right now, and you've got David Cameron there. There'll be concerns that, of course, he fought for the Remain campaign during the Brexit referendum, but I think that, as I said before, secretly, he's a bit of a Brexiteer, really, and he never really owned that choice. He did give the chance for the country to choose. The country chose, and he resigned immediately the same day as a Democrat, and that's what he did. But I think that he'll be interesting and probably a good appointment to the government. He should walk past us shortly, perhaps after Larry the Cat's done first, Andrew.
Should we just speculate for a minute as to what Therese Coffey might be moving to? She's Environment, Food and Rural Affairs now. Who would want that job, and where would she go?
I can't think what job she's got other than involving a large sack. She should be sacked.
But I'm not sure she's done anything that would really warrant being sacked. You can't.
She's had all the stuff going in the rivers on her watch, and she hasn't handled it well. Education.
Well, the Education Secretary of State is
Keegan.
Very vulnerable.
Yeah, over the concrete, accepting responsibility for it when it's down to schools.
Yeah, she did the whole thing.
Yeah.
But there's been no headline-grabbing event, and like you say, apart from the waterways.
Well, that's been deeply unpopular.
Very unpopular,
and cost them a lot of votes in the local council elections. And I don't think she handled it well.
But
the riot should be read to those water companies. It really should.
So was there going to be a big reshuffle today anyway, or is this all being triggered by Suella getting the boots?
Yes, Suella is the trigger.
And therefore...
There was going to be a big reshuffle. We thought it was going to be later in the month after the autumn statement and then get on, but he can't stand the speculation. Will she, won't she? She had to go. That was in his view.
Then that feels a bit harsh if Therese Coffey loses her ministerial role because of the domino effect, which then just makes me think, so what is the domino effect that would lead to her going?
Well, no, because other ministers would have gone in the reshuffle anyway. The door keeps opening and shutting, so is this David Cameron being all shy and reluctant?
Because
we're desperate to see. Larry the Cat's gone back in. We've got in the studio with us, we should say Simon Danchuk's here, former Labour MP. Now, Simon, you know with these reshuffles, this is astonishing, David Cameron coming back. Did you see this coming?
No, it's completely left field, isn't it? It's a high-risk strategy, I think, in terms of Rishi Sunak. Suella Braverman is very popular in the Red Wall seats. She's tough. She's a tough Home Secretary. That's how she's perceived. I was talking to Conservative Party members over the weekend. She's really popular with them. She took a tough line in terms of the anti-Semitism that we saw over the weekend. So it's a high-risk strategy moving her out as he has done.
Simon, we've got Jacob Rees-Mogg with us as well down the line as we watch these live pictures from Downing Street. Good morning, Jacob. I'm dying to hear your assessment of this situation. How long do you think it's been in the running that David Cameron was on standby to become Foreign Secretary?
I have no idea. I mean, it's certainly very interesting. The last time a former Prime Minister came back was Alec Douglas-Hume, and that was in the 1970 cabinet. So this is a long time since a Prime Minister has been willing to serve former Prime Minister in a less senior role. It used to happen the whole time in the 19th century and indeed into the 20th century, but about 50 years since it last happened.
Sacking of Suella Braverman, Jacob.
I think it's a mistake. That Suella understands what the country thinks about migration, the concerns the country has, is serious about it, was determined to get it down. Sometimes she spoke in a way that others were a bit squeamish about, but that's not really the point. The point is that as Home Secretary, she was committed to delivering something that the country thinks is important.
Why has he done it?
Why has he done it? Well, I think that he has a different view on migration. And I don't just mean illegal migration. I mean legal migration too. That you see, the small boats may be 50,000, but legal migration last year was 606,000. And there's strong pressure from the Treasury to keep it at those levels. And so Suella rightly understood that large-scale legal migration is problematic as well, and she had proposals for reducing it, which the Prime Minister didn't seem to be in favour of.
But unless he does take a harder line on migration, Jacob, he's going to lose the next election because it repeatedly appears in the top 3 issues that people feel really strongly about.
I think from the point of view of the Conservatives winning the next election, today is a mistake because Suella understood what the British voter thought and was trying to do something about it.
Yeah.
And it seems to me that the Prime Minister is not as well attuned to the voters' concerns as Suella Braverman.
And what about Mr Cleverly? You know him very well. Do you think he's plugged into the fact that the country is very anxious about the high levels of immigration?
I'm not sure that James is a first-class man. That there is nobody in Parliament who doesn't like and think well of James. So that's always important in politics, and he's very popular when broadcasting. So he's an excellent spokesman for conservatism. He's never particularly made his name on the migration issue, so I don't think it's particularly clear what his view is, but it's unlikely to be as tough as that of either Suella or indeed of Priti Patel before her.
Would you suggest that these changes indicate that the result on Wednesday from the Supreme Court about the Rwanda ruling will not go in the government's favour?
I don't know. I assume the Supreme Court keeps its judgments absolutely confidential until they're read out. I don't expect the government knows. I would certainly assume not. If the government does lose on Wednesday, it has to legislate to override the Human Rights Act and override the European Convention on Human Rights and to campaign to leave the European Convention on Human Rights. If the government's squeamish about that, then it won't deal with the illegal boats, let alone with legal migration.
And do we know what James Cleverly's position on that is?
Not attributably, no. I don't know his specific views on Rwanda or on the ECHR.
Do you see, Jacob, Suella will be on the backbenches. She's made it clear she's going to speak out. She will speak out on the European Court, of course. Is she going to be, in your view, a very serious contender to be the next leader of the Conservative Party if the Tories lose the next general election?
Suella was a serious contender last year when Boris went. She did much better than people had expected. She is a formidable politician. And importantly, she has her finger on what people think. She's not somebody who has been absorbed by the blob.
Jacob, before the weekend, there was so much speculation about whether these Armistice Day protests should go ahead. I'm right in thinking that you did believe that we should allow people to protest peacefully on the streets. Do you look back at the weekend and think that was the right decision now?
I think the law is right, that the police make the decision on intelligence, but that there should be a high bar for banning protests. There were instances of disorder and crime, and I think it's right to hold the police to account for that. I think we need to see a full audit, really, of the levels of crime that there were. But we are a free country, and protest is important, but it's not a free country to say anti-Semitic things and stir up hatred.
Jacob, what does David Cameron bring to this government, and what do you think he brings in the eyes of the electorate?
Well, it's very nice to have an old Etonian back in the cabinet, which we haven't had for, since I left. And I think this is very important, and there will be some champagne corks being popped in SL4 this afternoon.
Except not with those people, of course, who want to vote for the Conservative Party but think it is just full of old Etonians and you're all just keeping each other in the loop, and that actually maybe it's time for some non-old Etonians to be in government.
Well, the Prime Minister's a Wickhamist, so we haven't got that many old Etonians. There's only one in the Cabinet at the moment. Dare I say I wasn't being entirely serious with that point.
Can I ask you, Jacob, just finally before we let you go, do you think some Brexiteers like yourself may find this an appointment, will not approve of the appointment because of Cameron's position on Brexit, Project Fear, and his botched negotiation with the EU, that he should not be brought back at all?
Well, I think it's lucky that Nigel's gone off to the jungle and we won't be hearing his views on this.
What's your view?
Well, David Cameron got the Brexit issue wrong in terms of the Conservative Party and indeed the country at large who voted to leave. But he did give us the choice to have the vote. Without him, we wouldn't have had that referendum. He's a highly intelligent, capable individual. But will this potentially push some people off to reform is a question for the pollsters.
Do you think he's been brought in because Rishi Sunak knows that he's not terribly popular, which is quite an understatement, actually, with the voters, and he feels that David Cameron has that familiarity, he's much more of a warm person, you know, he's always been very good in front of the camera. Is that why he's been brought in?
If you'd wanted to bring back somebody who was popular and charismatic and appealed to the voters, there's a former Foreign Secretary and one-time Prime Minister who might have been brought back, I think has a much greater electoral reach than David Cameron, able though David Cameron is.
It's too big. Like, Rishi Sunak would not want Boris there because he would overshadow the popularity of Rishi Sunak, whereas David Cameron, if you think of Rishi Sunak as being head boy, you alluded to his time at Winchester, well, David Cameron is the brilliant deputy head boy, isn't he? He's good, but maybe not too good.
I'm not sure this is a contest of popularity between the two of them, really. That I'm not sure either of them poll particularly well at the moment.
Right, all right, that's Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Thank you,
great
Jacob.
to talk to you, Jacob. Good to see you.
Thank you.
Sarah Danchuk, from the Labour perspective, Rishi Sunak, I mean, your leader, Keir Starmer, has been champing at the bit for her to be sacked, Suella Braverman. Would he be relieved she's gone, or would he be disappointed she's gone?
Well, I think he'll be pleased with what's happened so far today. I mean, he's been goading Sunak into sacking Braverman, and he's gone and sacked her. It appears that Rishi Sunak is building a more moderate government with David Cameron coming forward. James Cleverly at the Home Office is quite a moderate, is James. He's not that well known to the public. He'll be much more moderate than Suella Braverman. I suspect that Keir Starmer is rubbing his hands now. I do think the David Cameron appointment is some of it is to do with creating a distraction. You know, we are now talking as much about David Cameron as we are about Suella Braverman being sacked. So there's some smart politics there, but I think he's moving his party more to the centre ground. And if I was a Red Wall Conservative MP, I'd be very worried.
What do you make of that, Piers?
Yes, I think Simon summed it up very well. The Red Wall Brigade will be very unhappy because they were right behind Suella. And as Jacob Rees-Mogg was saying, I mean, she did have a big following on the immigration front. And Cleverly has got to move quickly, and they've got to do something if, as the Supreme Court, I'm sure, will vote against the government, rule against the government. And then the question of coming out of the ECHR, I think, is a very, very difficult decision and will cause a great deal of debate.
She, of course, will campaign for that on the back benches.
She will campaign for it, and I suspect Cleverly will not want to come out of it.
I'm sure that's the
and neither will Cameron.
No, he won't.
From a Foreign Secretary's point of view, because he will have a say in that as well.
Of course he will.
And so a lot of issues Cameron now will have input into, not just as Foreign Secretary, as a member of the Cabinet. And Rishi does listen to members of the Cabinet. He's a man who listens and thinks things through. So Cameron's influence is going to be really of great significance.
Let's have a look. So when she was sacked, Suella Braverman's statement said, "It has been the greatest privilege of my life to serve as Home Secretary." And she said, "I will have more to say in due course." I imagine she will, Simon Danchett. That sounds a little loaded statement. Of course, it's easy to forget because we've been so focused on events of this weekend and the fact that she criticised the police, perhaps in the run-up to Armistice Day. What really caused a lot of controversy, Simon, recently was her saying that homelessness was a lifestyle choice.
Yeah.
Rishi Sunak can add that to the list of misdemeanours. Yes,
absolutely. And I've been quite enthused by what Suella Braverman's done whilst Home Secretary, but she clearly got it wrong in terms of homelessness. Her remarks there were just incorrect, you know what I mean, and that's probably added to the
I think I sort of felt that was probably one of the final straws for the Prime Minister, and you could see in Prime Minister's questions last week when he was being goaded by Keir Starmer, he was sitting next to Suella Braverman, and the body language, Piers, was terrible.
Yes.
He wanted that woman to be 40 miles away,
it was
not sitting next to him.
I saw that too, and but there's no question that was the most unfortunate thing to say.
Yeah.
And there is this question of whether she really was angling to be sacked.
Yeah.
That she probably knows the decision's going to go against her on Wednesday. She knows that that she's in a hopeless position at the moment, and therefore maybe come back as leader. That's what I suspect she really wants.
Yeah.
It was under Liz Truss, of course, that she accidentally sent emails.
But she was fired over
from
it.
a private, and Liz Truss fired her, didn't she?
She
for
did.
that?
Straight away.
Yeah.
So it's the second time she's just been
and Sunak brought her back because she's got behind his leadership. Otherwise, it could have been that Boris was able to get in the race.
But in politics, you can get sacked all the time.
Yeah.
Look at Peter Mandelson.
Yeah.
He was sacked twice.
And he came back.
And now he's back advising Starmer.
Yeah, exactly.
And putting himself in the front of the Labour Party at the conference. He even gatecrashed your show, Andrew.
He did. Simon, this is all a distraction, of course, from the huge problems going on in your own party over war in Gaza. It could be that there is a vote on the King's speech. We don't know yet whether the Speaker's going to permit the motion from the SNP to be voted on. Yeah. But if that's the case, and Labour frontbenchers vote with the SNP in favour of a ceasefire now, Starmer's going to have to start sacking people.
Things are moving very quickly, aren't they? We've seen what's happened over the weekend, the pro-Palestine rally, march there, lots of anti-Semitism. Then we've got the reshuffle this morning. Yeah. We're anticipating a vote on the Middle East on Wednesday. And you're absolutely right. If Sunak sorts things out today, gets his reshuffle sorted and out of the way, it then moves the spotlight back to Labour. And that the Middle East is a real challenge for Starmer. He's walking a tightrope. Lots of Muslim voters in the UK that won't be happy with his position on the ceasefire. Lots of Labour MPs backing a ceasefire while Starmer isn't. That will cause real trouble for him on Wednesday if it goes ahead.
But what he'll do, won't he do what they always do? They'll somehow, these frontbenchers will be mysteriously granted leave of absence from the Commons that day. Yeah. So they can avoid voting against the party. But where's the principle in that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think he's going to be called out on this. He has to take a tough line, and I've said this from day one. He has to take a tough line on saying to those in his parliamentary Labour Party, get behind me on this issue.
So far, he's sticking to his guns, Piers.
Yes.
Starmer.
Yes.
Unusually.
Yes, he is. And I thought his speech on why he didn't back the ceasefire was extremely good. It was the first time I've been impressed with him, and he came across as a man of stature over that, and I admire him for holding the ground, particularly against the awful Jeremy Corbyn, who was, of course, in great to the forefront over the weekend, stirring up anti-Semitism, hatred in the most appalling way. In my view, he was very close to making criminal statements himself.
Here we go. So David Cameron has just walked out into Downing Street. So Chris Hope, we're going to go to Chris Hope immediately.
So David Cameron has chosen to walk out the front door and straight through the press pack, making sure that everybody got a photograph of him. I'm not sure who was with him. Do we know?
No, I couldn't catch who that was. That could well be a senior diplomat or Mandarin. We're going to go straight to Chris Hope in number 10 Downing Street. Chris.
Well, there's one question there for David Cameron. Are you glad to be back? he looked away and was chatting away, I think, with probably like a senior official there from the Foreign Secretary. He's walked now through the shortcut between Downing Street and King Charles Street, where his new desk awaits as the new Foreign Secretary of the United Kingdom. A big moment for him. He looked relaxed, a bit tanned maybe, a bit you know, the old Cameron is back. It's quite an extraordinary moment here, a retread of the period 2010-2016, of course, when he was Prime Minister.
William Hague did the foreign brief from the House of Lords, but this is the first time a former Prime Minister, Chris, has been back in government since 1970.
That's right. I mean, I think, yes, indeed. It's very rare you come back as a second bite. Normally, if you're a former Prime Minister, you go off and make a living, or you retire if you're older, or what Liz Truss does is make speeches, so does Theresa May. It's very rare you come back into the actual game. I think that is really because, in many ways, he has unfinished business. He resigned, didn't he, on the steps behind me at Downing Street the morning of the referendum campaign vote in 2016, and that was him gone. And he's really been trying to find a role since then, failed to find one, and now he's back doing public service, something which we always wanted to do. He's a well-regarded individual, I think. He may have an issue. I think there's a problem, by the way, with the Tory right not going away, as made very clear there by Jacob Rees-Mogg, a standard-bearer for the right. I think that's the concern. What can Rishi Sunak do now to assuage concerns that the party's been taken over by moderate Tories with no real feeling for the right wing of the party? That's the problem. But for David Cameron, it's great he's back. It's what he wants to do, and I think he's going to be on the world stage, a senior figure on the world stage, and that's a good thing.
And you know who he appeals to, actually, David Cameron? He probably appeals to those Conservative voters, the people who we hear from all the time, who say, I voted for the Conservatives for 20 years and I won't vote for them again. Actually, they will probably have good memories of him. As I was saying, he didn't leave under huge controversy, unless you were a Remainer. And so maybe he does come with a sort of a positivity that he can bring to the Conservative Party, and a very broad appeal. He's a household name, everyone knows his face.
Yeah, Bev, if you ask me, yeah, I agree with that. I think he's someone who gave the choice to Britain to vote to remain or stay within the European Union, and that's something which many Brexiteers might thank him for. His problem was he got involved in the nitty-gritty of that fight. He didn't do what Harold Wilson did in the 70s and stay above it, so he could then implement whatever the people chose to do. Instead, he took sides, and that was his big mistake, I think, in politics. Had he simply allowed, say, George Osborne, the Chancellor at the time, to run that Remain campaign, and he would have stood back from it, that might have been a better position. Instead, he kind of rushed the negotiation, didn't he? He gave himself till the end of 2017 to get that negotiation done. He got it finished by February 2016, and then went for a June 2016 referendum 18 months before he had to do it. The deal he got was not good enough for Angela Merkel, the German Chancellor, and history came to pass. We left the European Union. That's how he might reflect on it. But he's back now with more to give, and I think that's probably it's a good thing for the Tory party. It does provide a kind of an older man who can give more advice to the young team around Rishi Sunak. Until now, it's been Lord Hague, William Hague, has been seen as the person who Mr Sunak relies on for advice, a kind of grown up in the room. That person is now going to be David Cameron.
I wonder if James Cleverly wants this role. And what I mean by that is it's a very difficult position to have in government. And it was in the summer. You have to have a short memory to forgive politicians, don't you? Because the phrases that they say very much come back and bite them if they're not careful.
If he fixes this problem of migration and the small boats, it will put him in a commanding position to be the next leader of the Tory party in a way he couldn't from being Foreign Secretary. But
in the summer, when there was speculation that he might be moved to defence in place of Ben Wallace, the phrase he used was he would have to be dragged out of this job with nail marks down the parquet flooring, he said. That was how much he likes being Foreign Secretary. He said, if anyone in the UK is watching, particularly the Prime Minister, I very much want to stay put. I very much want to stay as Foreign Secretary. It's a job that I love. It's an important job. Fast forward 3 months and he's not got it anymore.
Check his nails.
But I wonder if he would want this job. As you say, it could be a bit of a poison chalice. It's got huge responsibility that comes with with it. Should we bring in our guest?
Yeah.
We're joined now by author and broadcaster Emma Wolfe and also former Labour advisor Matthew Laza to discuss this.
Let's ask Matthew Laza first of all, because Simon Janchuk was here.
Yeah.
You know Simon very well from Labour MP.
I first met Simon when I was at school, Andrew, but at a young socialist training event.
Very good, very good.
Showing my age.
You're showing your age. But he said this is great for Labour.
Yeah, I think it is. I think Simon's absolutely right. I think the Cameron appointment is extraordinary because it plays right into the hands of those who think that A, Rishi is out of touch, but B, that he doesn't stick to what he said. How many weeks ago is it that we were told he was the change candidate?
And he's brought
and yet
back.
he's brought back. He's this blast from the past. And I was just thinking, you know, oh, is this a clever masterstroke? Some of the people around Rishi will be thinking it is, like when Gordon Brown brought Peter Mandelson back from Brussels.
Right.
But that was very different because Peter represented, in a sense, the Blairite faction, and that was all about uniting the Blairites and the Brownites, ending the wars of the TBs and the GBs. Cameron doesn't represent any faction because if you're pro-European, you're pretty mad at Cameron for how he totally mishandled the referendum, and if you're a Brexiteer, well, you're on a different side of the argument anyway.
But you could argue also, Matthew, he's a class act. He won 2 elections, more than your lot have done for a very, very long time.
Well, he was one and a half.
Yeah, he won in a hung parliament, and then he won with a clear majority.
Absolutely.
If the referendum had gone the other way, he could have been Prime Minister for a very long time.
Absolutely, but it didn't, and I think that's the big. I mean, I think it was such a miscalculation, and also that he scarpered the scene.
That was terrible.
There's a lot of people still bitter that he scarpered the scene in a sense. They ended up with Theresa May, and we know what's followed since as a consequence of him departing so quickly. The other thing is he did have all this issue with this guy that he worked for, this financier Lex Greensill. I wonder if your colleagues on Fleet Street have got things tucked away that they may be pressing publish on about that.
He did himself huge damage. Just to remind people, he was lobbying government ministers, including Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor, on behalf of a company which subsequently went bust.
Absolutely, yes.
Having had the guy, Greensill, in the Cabinet Office when he was Prime Minister, which looked like he was
he'd given him an appointment, hadn't he? Yeah.
Warming him up for when he left Number 10, so that will all come. Emma, what do you think? David Cameron. We're not talking about Suella, are we? So that's something for Cameron.
But I think it comes together.
Sunak.
I think Braverman out and Cameron in is angering a lot on the right. There are so many Brexiteers texting me this morning going, that's it, voting reform. Because instinctively, of course she's mishandled the past week. It wasn't done, whether you agree with her or not, it wasn't done the way a Home Secretary should have done it. But many instinctively agreed with Suella Braverman. Now they have David Cameron coming back. People are, and this should have been Sunak's moment. This should have been his moment of finally looking a bit like a leader, making decisions. And instead, as Matthew said, as Simon has said, this is going to play really well for Keir Starmer.
So has he misread Rishi Sunak that David Cameron is viewed by the majority of people as being part of the West London liberal elite?
Yes, indeed.
Notting Hill.
Very socially progressive, probably rather broad-minded about immigration. He always was. And so it's going to backfire on him if what he wanted to do is to bring over people who might be voting for reform or Labour.
I think there's absolutely no doubt that Sunak is now on borrowed time. I don't think anyone can see him carrying on after this.
Who does he appeal to then? Who does he think David Cameron? Because I was saying maybe it's those Conservative voters who liked him because he wasn't particularly controversial and they see him as a fairly safe pair of hands back in government, a grown-up.
That middle ground who were considering voting Labour, who are instinctively Tory but were considering voting for Sir Keir Starmer.
Yes.
So, yes, he is going to appeal to that, but I think that... obviously, a reshuffle is chaotic by its very nature, but this doesn't look like Rishi Sunak's in charge, really.
Do you think? Do you agree with that?
Well, I think what's really...
it's a big decision, isn't it?
Absolutely. Well, I think there was a story this morning that the Lib Dems were hoping to weaponise Suella if she lingered on against the Tories in the Blue Wall. Absolutely. And I think that the Cameron, rather to me, looks like Sunak's given up on the Red Wall and is now literally trying to store up the Blue Wall, because Cameron does appeal to those posh seats in the home counties.
That's right.
Sort of Oxfordshire, Berkshire, Surrey belt.
I think there is a sense, if you talk to Red Wall Tory MPs, they pretty much know it's over.
Yeah.
But is that going to be enough, Matthew? Is that
no,
going
I don't
to be
think it
enough
will
to
be.
get him over the line?
Absolutely.
Because
No, I don't
in other
think it will
news,
be.
Labour are way ahead. Labour are doing brilliantly in the latest polls.
And the other thing is,
You know?
it seems tone deaf for Sunak, because if you're one of those voters in that blue wall, quite a lot of those people are pro-European.
Yeah.
They've got second homes in Europe,
Yeah.
a large number of them, and they're still not going to forgive Cameron for them mishandling the referendum. I think if they brought Hague back, actually, I think Christopher mentioned that Hague's a sort of eminence grise to Sunak. That would have sent out a signal that, yes, I'm bringing back a Liberal Tory, but one who's got wider appeal. Cameron seems to me damaged goods.
What about the democratic idea that we're having a Foreign Secretary operating in the House of Lords? So he can't be challenged by elected MPs.
That does seem to me very strange, and that decision.
And he hasn't been voted in by any of the electorate.
Well, and people feel this about Sunak already, that he hasn't been voted in, that they've been replaced and replaced. And so I think this is only... People are saying general election now.
Yeah, but that won't come. But that is going to be what some people are arguing. Where is the democracy here? Because elected MPs should be able to
answer questions in the House of Commons.
And we haven't had a Foreign Secretary in the House of Lords since Carrington resigned over the Falklands War. That was 1982. So the change candidate, Matthew, has turned the clock back.
It's dusting down the ermine.
40 years.
Yeah, 40 years. It doesn't look very modern. It doesn't look very future-looking.
Well, I'm thinking of Anthony Trollope with the Prime Minister being in the House of Lords and not being in the House of Commons at all.
Well, I'm sure he looked very fetching in his early
the thing about him is he's not even been particularly involved in policy. I mean, there was a story this morning that Tony Blair wants to be the envoy in Gaza. He's not been doing things like he's been helping out at his local food bank.
Please don't let Tony Blair be the envoy in Gaza.
He
has. Tony Blair, the envoy in Gaza, he was a Middle East peace envoy. Didn't do very well with that.
Quite, but I mean, it certainly it didn't make much of a difference. But the FT says that he's acceptable to Netanyahu this morning. But Cameron was just
so that's another former Prime Minister
coming back, but on an international stage. But do you remember what's going to happen to Cameron's shed? Do you remember when he left? He had this £25,000 shed in his garden.
It will become the place where you put the trash.
But I think the worst thing about that garden shed, it was a gypsy caravan, was the fact that he was photographed. He got it for free, even though it was 20.
Didn't he? As an influencer.
And wrote a book that really didn't sell.
It's very heavily remade.
I would like to know what Samantha Cameron thinks of this morning, because she didn't really hold back on the fact that she was quite happy when he left. I spent the weekend looking on her dresses website, deciding, because she's done very well. I decided they're a bit too expensive, actually.
No, her fashion company hasn't done well.
No,
they don't do
like
well. She keeps having to have injections of cash in it. It's very difficult to make these. It might be nice clothes, but it's very difficult to make these labels work.
So let's just recap. People who are joining us now at 10:34 on Monday morning. What's happened? Well, we thought we were going to come on air this morning and talk about the fact that maybe Mark Rowley might have resigned about protests over the weekend. Thank you. That hasn't happened. What's happened is this morning, Rishi Sunak has announced that he has sacked the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman. Why? If we look back on what's happened in the last 2 to 3 weeks, actually, she made the statement about homeless people choosing that as a lifestyle option. That was controversial. She then wrote the very controversial piece in The Times, which criticised the Met Police, saying that they handled right-wing protesters more harshly than they handle left-wing protesters. We saw on Saturday, at the weekend, protests over the weekend, largely the pro-Palestinian march was largely peaceful. There was some definite anti-Semitism.
Disgraceful anti-Semitism.
Disgusting anti-Semitism. But the violence came from those people who are being described as far right, and some of them absolutely were. They were just good old-fashioned football hooligan racists that caused problems outside of 10 Downing Street. That is possibly what's done for Suella this morning, because Rishi Sunak will say, your article in the newspaper fed that hate, you caused that division, and so she's gone.
And she's been replaced by James Cleverly, who's moved from Foreign Secretary to Home Secretary, and the jaw-dropper, David Cameron. Yes, you heard it. David Cameron is back in government as Foreign Secretary, having flounced out of Number 10 after losing Brexit. We're going now to Chris Hope in Number 10, our political editor, to update us. Chris.
Andrew and Bev, that's right. Really not since Bobby Ewing woke up after a shower and dreamt all of what happened in Dallas back in the 80s have we seen a bigger comeback than this one. Sadly for David Cameron, it hasn't been a dream. Britain has left the European Union and lots of complicated things happening on the world stage. But David Cameron is back. A few minutes ago, he left Number 10, where he resigned from. Don't forget, back in June 2016. He comes walked through these gates next to me here, back to his new desk in King Charles Street in the Foreign Office. He is now the new Foreign Secretary. The Foreign Secretary Secretary is now the new Home Secretary, James Cleverly. He's left by vehicle about an hour ago by the pearly gates, the end of Downing Street. He's gone to the Home Office to work on what on earth to do about the Rwanda plan, whether the Supreme Court will rule whether that plan to process migrants' applications to stay here if they arrive illegally in Rwanda, if that's legal or not, we'll find out on Wednesday. Longer term, he's looking at the net migration figures next week, when we'll expect to see probably hundreds of thousands of people arrived here legally on the government's watch, and how to defend that. That's what's happened so far. Suella Braverman has left government. She was sacked by the Prime Minister. Number 10 so far has said this reshuffle will give the PM a united team to deliver the change this country needs for the long term. That word united is so important, because clearly, as you've been saying on air there, Bev and Andrew, Suella Braverman was not seen as being united the way she behaved last week with that unsigned off Times article, which did so much damage to the government in the run-up to Armistice Day commemorations, and many would say, or have said, contributed to some of the problems on the street. Certainly that's been claimed by Sadiq Khan, the Mayor of London. Elsewhere in government, Neil O'Brien, the senior health minister, he's left government, as has Nick Gibb, the schools minister. So the drama is not over yet. And behind me, Therese Coffey has walked up to the front door and gone inside. Now, that is many of us scratching our heads, because she had been tipped as someone on the way out of government. And normally, if you're sacked, the PM is a nice person. He does it behind the scenes in Parliament, not through the front door. So we don't know why she's here. We're trying to find out. Is she going to get promotion? Is there a new role? We think, though, that one of these big moves that won't happen is Jeremy Hunt, who I call the accidental Chancellor, made Chancellor by Liz Truss in September last year, kept on by Rishi Sunak. He's staying where he is. He's got a lot of work to do, not least because the autumn statement is due out next Wednesday next week, and then the spring statement, the budget in March. So he's staying where he is as far as we know, but this is nowhere near over yet. But the big headline there is Suella Braverman out, Cleverly over the Home Office, and amazingly, in the Foreign Office, David Cameron's back.
Chris, what of the point Jacob Rees-Mogg's made, and Emma Wolf was saying it's all over social media, a lot of Tories saying, that's it now, I'm done with the Conservative Party, David Cameron, the arch remainer, back in the Cabinet, it's too much, we're off to Reform UK.
I think that is a very good point to make. Reform UK polling around 7 points, 9 points in the polls. Don't forget, look at those two big by-elections. Earlier this month, wasn't it? Just about in Mid-Bedfordshire and Tamworth. The votes that were won by the Reform candidate on the right of the Tory party, had those votes gone to the Tory party, the Tories would have claimed both those seats. So, David Cameron does bring in an adult into the room, does allow a bit more grown-ups, some more experience in Mr Sunak's team. He's, of course, 20 years younger than Mr Sunak is than David Cameron, who's nearly 60. But it doesn't answer the key question of these kind of right-wing policies, tax cutting, measures which will prove to the right of the party. And that's what Suella Braverman gave the cover for Rishi Sunak. The fact she's gone, as articulated by Jacob Rees-Mogg on GBNews, is a problem and an unresolved issue for Rishi Sunak.
All right, that's Chris Hope in Downsy. We've got Matthew Lars with a former Labour advisor. What do you think Nigel Farage might be saying as he just about to go into the jungle and out of view for a few? I mean, have they got this reshuffle done just in time? Because I can imagine we'll hear the explosion from down under, won't we?
Absolutely. I mean, I think in a sense Nigel's going to be. It's going to give Nigel a bit of a boost before he goes into the jungle, because, as you say, this is not just Labour that will hope to benefit from this, but it also Reform, because clearly the Cameron effect will be toxic to those who are on the edge, who are teetering, who thought they'd had enough of what's going on inside the Tory party. And this will be the final straw, because this is clearly a victory, as they would see it, for the left of the Tory party, for the pro-European wing, even if they've had to quieten down their love of Europe.
I've just got what he said about UKIP, which was led by Nigel Farage. He described them as fruitcakes, loonies, and closet racers. That will come back to haunt him, because people like me are not going to stop reminding him that he said that. And that was a lot of us who voted for Brexit in 2016. Well, which better that? Because you can't meet... I'm not been in the closet for years, my dear.
Exactly.
You might be a loon.
Yeah.
It's almost as though the Braverman sacking wouldn't quite have been enough, but Cameron coming back in is going to push people over the edge. And I think this is brilliant for Nigel. It'll give him so much to talk about in the jungle.
Yeah.
To really hold forth on. I mean, I thought he was going to win anyway, but I think this is going to be absolutely brilliant for his, million and a half
Do you know what I think? The more I consider events of of this morning, since we came on air at 9:30, it's the lack of democracy at work here. He's brought in a non-elected politician.
One of the great,
who won't even sit in the Democratic chamber.
Into one of the great offices of state. Home Office, Treasury, Prime Minister, Foreign Secretary. They are the great offices of state.
Absolutely. And interestingly, they're now all occupied by men again and all occupied by public school boys.
Very good point.
At a time when the world is on fire, when the Foreign Secretary is a very, very key appointment.
Very key appointment at the moment, particularly at the moment. Of course,
he's tone deaf, isn't he?
But you would, if he was here, Sunak, he would say, but Cameron brings to the job enormous experience, more experience than Sunak has got.
So ironic that we're talking about, and I've heard it repeatedly this morning, we're talking about David Cameron as the adult in the room, this man who's got the experience, the gravitas.
But what does it tell you about the cabinet?
What does it tell us about the current cabinet?
What does it tell us about politics in general?
Absolutely.
I mean, asked most people, name me 6 cabinet ministers, they'd struggle. If the Transport Secretary walked in this building, people wouldn't know who he is.
I think
and we should, because the transport situation is in utter chaos.
I think, exactly, and I think most people would be able to name Suella Braverman right now in the country.
Yeah, and they'd know her picture.
And having it all shows Sunak's lack of judgment as well as his lack of leadership and authority, and just a nuance about the way the mood in the country is at the moment.
And how you look and appeal to modern Britain. So I was expecting Penny Mordaunt would get promoted to one of these office state, because she's on the left of the party, but at least she talks human, Andrew, doesn't she?
She does.
She has an appeal that cuts way beyond.
I can't stand her personally. I can't stand her, and I don't say that about many women in the public eye, but I find her
my
deeply
problem
unpalatable.
was when she said in the Commons she referred to pregnant people. No, love, they're women.
Let's go back to Chris Hope.
We've got more news.
Chris, good morning. Are you there, Chris? Tell us what the latest is. There might be people just tuning in right now. What's going on?
Hello, Bev. More new moves at the Department for Health, where Will Quince, a senior Minister of State, has stood down as the Health Minister, so which means that there are 2 jobs now going in the Health Department. Neil O'Brien and Will Quince have gone. Will Quince, no surprise, he's leaving politics the next election. He now wants to try and work out how he finds a transition into the private sector. Bev's point there, I think, really well made about the point about a lack of democratic accountability. Sir Michael Fabricant, a friend of GBNews, has been texting me saying, is no one's pointing out that although he'll bring heft to the role, the problem with David Cameron is that, of course, he can't answer questions in the House of Commons, he can't answer statements, he can't do urgent questions demanded by Labour, say on Israel or the Hamas issues there. He can't be democratically accountable to members of Parliament. Only in the House of Lords can he do that, and number 2 will do it for him in the Commons. There's that idea of democratic accountability that Bev raised is a big one, and is exercising MPs right now on my WhatsApp. But we have heard for the first time from David Cameron. He has said that he's hoping that his time as Prime Minister for 6 years can be used to support Rishi Sunak in his time as Prime Minister. He says he's been out of frontline politics for 7 years, but he hopes his experience both as PM and Tory leader for 11 years will assist him in helping the PM with these vital changes. He says, indeed, on the issue of Brexit, he says, although I may have to agree with some individuals' decisions, it's clear to me that Mr Sunak is a strong, capable Prime Minister. That goes back, don't forget, to 3 weeks ago, Andrew and Bev. The PM put out a statement saying he disapproved of the decision to axe HS2. Now that was a big moment for him. He didn't really step in. The first time I think he stepped into frontline politics was on that decision made by Mr Sunak at the party conference earlier in October. So the fact that he's now saying, I may disagree, but I'm moving on, shows that he's now back in politics when all decisions are made by the cabinet.
So that's very interesting. I've got a really interesting poll here, just been sent to me by Savanta. Now, they did a poll around the time of the Tory conference on the favourability and popularity of, guess what, former Conservative leaders. Oh dear, Rishi, you should have seen this poll. 24% of British adults feel favourably towards David Cameron, 45% unfavourably. That isn't great.
He's tone deaf.
And that's why he's been off our TV screens for 7 years. The most of those 7 years. There are a couple of things about Cameron. One of which is his reputation was for being pretty chillaxed. Do you remember the sort of, the DVD nights he used to have? This dates him as Prime Minister.
Let's talk to somebody who knows him, knows David Cameron well. Former head of press for Cameron, Giles Kenningham, joins us now. Good morning, Giles. Thank you so much for elucidating this situation for us. Do you have any idea how long this has been bubbling away in the background for?
No idea whatsoever. I do know that Cameron always, I think, wanted a role in public life, wanted to come back. Obviously, it was very difficult with the Brexit referendum, which was incredibly polarising and divisive. But actually, I think he'll add a lot to public life. He was Prime Minister for 6 years. He's got a weight of experience. He will see many of the problems which Rishi has been dealing with, and to some extent can perform the role that William Hague did for him. When William Hague was Foreign Secretary and Cameron was Prime Minister, he'd been Tory leader and was a wise person to have around the table, wise counsel. So I think it will overall benefit the government. He will be a loyal lieutenant. He's done the job. He won't be seeking it again. So, yeah, of course, ruffled some feathers. Some people won't be happy. That's politics. That's life. But I think in the grander scheme of things, he adds a lot of heft, a lot of experience, a lot of gravitas to the Tory brand.
Well, how does that help in the Red Wall, where they voted for Brexit and they saw David Cameron as the architect, Giles, of Project Fear and the botched negotiation, who then cleared off when it all went wrong for him?
I think, Andrew, to your point, Brexit's been done. I think, that won't be on the ballot paper at the next election. Yeah. He accepts it's a settled issue and accepts that, Sunak is the lead on it. Remember, Sunak was a Brexiteer and, all things Brexit will come from him.
I tell you who won't like this, Giles. Anybody that likes the concept of democracy, where we have voted politicians into those positions as our representatives. They then get handpicked to become part of the cabinet. Cameron hasn't been voted for by anybody for years. So, is that not a bit embarrassing for him?
Well, look, there is precedent for this. Labour brought back Peter Mandelson. He was made a Lord, then Business Secretary in the past. I think, look, no system is perfect. Of course, you can make that argument. I think, quid pro quo, though, what you are getting is someone with a lot of experience, a huge intellectual brain around the table, someone who does believe in public service, and I think will put his elbow to the wheel and has got Britain's best interests at heart.
But Rishi Sunak hasn't even been voted for by the electorate. He wasn't even voted in by the members of the Conservative Party. So we've got two key people now that have been parachuted into those roles. We need a general election now, don't we, Giles?
It's not going to happen. They never give up.
Well, you'll be getting, Bev, I think you'll be getting one soon. You've only got a year to wait.
Is it going to be a year?
Giles, Go on. We've got... What happens? You see, everybody thinks it'll be October, November, because Prime Ministers never willingly give up office. But just say they wait that long, Giles. And what if it's a mild summer and the boats come cascading across the channel, making a mockery of Rishi's pledge to stop the boats? Isn't that why he could possibly go earlier, April or May, and bring this sorry affair to an end?
Look, he possibly could go earlier. I suspect he'll go long because he'll want the economy to turn around and hope that, there's a reversal of fortunes. And let's bear in mind, I think Keir Starmer is still untested. He's not particularly great. He's not agile on his feet. And maybe actually if there was a long election campaign, he may unravel. He may be found wanting. So I suspect they'll go the full distance, full 5 years on this.
Giles, I want to know this and be honest with me. Are you going to work for David Cameron again? Are you
already doing it this morning.
Are you going back? Nice job in the Foreign Office. It's a very nice view of Whitehall.
No, my time is done. It's a great privilege to do those jobs, but I won't be going back now.
You're absolutely convinced of that. What if he calls you? What if the call comes? Giles, I've got the Foreign Secretary on the line.
No, I will not be going back, but look,
why not? Why not? Is he a difficult boss?
No, not at all. Just, been there, done that.
So's David Cameron. So's David Cameron. He's been there, done that, and he's going back.
Yes, he has. But no, look, I think he'll be a great addition.
Do you think he's going to be very much in the public eye in this role? Do you think he's going to be wheeled out for all the interviews, all the media, try and win everybody over again?
I think, look, they will use him because he is a very competent, he's a very adept media performer. So I think you probably will see him out a fair bit on the airwaves. Perhaps even on a great establishment like GBNews, if you're lucky.
Well, he's always welcome on GBNews, Giles, as are you, of course. That's Giles Kenningham, former head of press for David Cameron. We've still got our panel here. Matthew, he's got a point, though, hasn't he, Giles Kenningham? Your bloke, Keir Starmer, he's not great, is he?
I think he's doing a great job.
Come on. Come on.
You know,
his own ratings are in negative territory, and the only reason they're so far ahead in the polls is because the Conservatives have made such a mess of
they've
just
not
about
helped themselves
everything.
this morning, so they've certainly maintained that position.
Do you think
I think
is he a great
really going into the role.
Is he a great speaker? No. Has he got a weird voice? Yes. What does he stand for? What does he stand for?
I think he stands very clearly for mainstream Labour values, which is why he stood firm.
What sort of cliche is that?
I would die
he stood firm.
Mainstream values.
That's why
Can
he
you?
stood
All right.
firm.
Help me out.
That's called,
Help me out.
Matthew, that's called playing for time.
What are the 5 pledges that Keir Starmer came up with earlier in the year?
They're not just pledges, they're missions.
Right, what are the 5 missions?
Are to
stop the boats.
They are not to stop the boats.
No.
That is, it should be one of them, and I would advise them.
No,
it should
we
be
want
one
you
of
to
them.
talk.
I can't
Starmer's
remember
5
the 5 off
missions.
the top of my
You
head.
can't remember them.
Starmer's
When I worked for Ed, we used to write them.
they went over my head.
Starmer's.
When I worked for Ed Miliband, we had to write them on our hands.
Yeah, yeah,
So we
exactly.
couldn't really get
Because the
them.
thing is, they
If I was
were-
on the payroll, I remember.
The thing is, Matthew, you know, they were wishy-washy waffle.
I'm slightly think the 5 pledges thing has been overdone for all parties. As somebody was there when not responsible for, but was there when the Ed Stone was unveiled.
You all deny the Ed Stone.
It was
You
above my pay
all
grade.
deny
It was
the Ed
above
Stone.
my pay grade.
It was
I can tell you that.
ludicrous.
I mean, 5 pledges worked for Blair. I think it's been there, done that. I think that it's a law of diminishing returns.
And there was a pledge card.
There was a
and
little
it
pledge card. We used to carry it around in our wallets as these keen little
There was a
flags.
headstone. There was a headstone
It
at
was,
one
it
point.
was.
What they've underestimated is people's attention
The
span is
slogan.
less now than it was then.
This is
I
before
can't remember
social
5
media.
bullet points
But
now.
also, whatever you say about Starmer, he isn't Tony Blair.
No, he's not Tony Blair, and in
He's
some
not.
ways that's a negative.
Yeah, but
in
Blair
some
was
ways it's positive.
exciting and
positive.
radical, and he won by a landslide.
Well, he did win by a landslide, but we may come on this morning to discuss how it looks like Keir's set to win by an even bigger landslide.
No, I don't think so.
I had hair and hope, and I've still got hope, but the hair's gone.
What do you think Keir Starmer's doing right now, Emma?
Well, this is what I'm
Apart
trying
from watching
to
GB News. Good
You're
morning.
very welcome to come
Keir
on, Sir
Starmer.
Keir,
Also,
even though I
Matthew,
think you're
don't
boring.
make pledges. If pledges mean nothing, don't make pledges. It's like getting married. You pledge to somebody at the altar. Don't make the pledges then. Don't carve them on a gravestone, on a headstone, or any of that.
Well, of course, the Prime Minister's not going to meet his 5 pledges.
I would die right now to be a fly on the wall in Starmer's bunker. He must be not only rubbing his hands, but also just the excitement, the thrill of watching this all fall apart.
And yet, when you say that, what I imagine is he's not going to make anything of it. This is the problem
I
with
think
Starmer.
he's going to keep quiet
He
and
gets
let it happen
lobbied
for a while.
these really easy balls, and he fails to hit them back in any meaningful way.
Well, I mean, I think that's a bit harsh, because I think he did quite well this week on Suella. I think he made some.
Did he?
Well, you could see the questions though in the article.
Yeah, I mean now they'll all be about Cameron. They'll all be about Cameron coming back.
But that's for Rishi. That's a job done in a sense, short term.
Absolutely.
It's a day. We're all talking about Cameron, and we're not talking about the fact he's sacked a Home Secretary who's very popular with lots of our viewers and listeners.
And that's why they've done it. So they've done it for short-term headlines because it's a distraction. A good day to bury bad. I mean, it's a good way of burying bad news in the old spin.
But I want to speak up for Cleverly too. I've known Cleverly a long time. He'll be a good Home Secretary. But he won't. What he won't see the need to do is to court headlines.
Absolutely, he won't be doing what Suella was doing, which is basically just putting red flags out there for the red meat, as it was out there for the Tory leadership.
She sort of couldn't help herself, could she? She sort of couldn't help herself.
But you see, we were speculating, weren't we, whether she was intending to get fired? Was this a deliberate?
She's much happier on the backbenches.
What do you think, Emma? Was this deliberate? She's martyred herself here on the altar of strong borders.
Over the past week, well, just a couple of weeks actually, she has been more and more incendiary, and it was almost goading Rishi Sunak to do something. Yeah, and this is what he's done. But I
think he was going to do it anyway, Emma. I think it was about timing.
I think he was forced to. Look, the headlines, there were at least 3 headlines yesterday morning saying sack her now. He looked so weak, and yet he doesn't.
Because I'd said on a trail for the programme saying, no, the reshuffle won't be today, so that was rather embarrassing.
Yes, exactly.
But and somebody saw it and sent me a message saying, no, it will be today because he can't allow her to resign. If Rwanda goes wrong in the Supreme Court, and let's be honest, the judges will hate Rwanda, of course they will. If it goes wrong, she resigns on a point of principle. He's then denied the chance to sack her, and he wants to be seen to be tough to sack her. So the reshuffle has to be today.
And Andrew, you just said that it's a distraction, that the appointment of Cameron is to detract from or to distract from.
Well, I think he genuinely thinks it will be.
No, but I think they cancel each other out. I think people are as angry. I think it adds fuel to the fire. They are as angry about Braverman being sacked as they are about Cameron coming in. It's a double whammy.
Well, my newspaper will certainly be angry because we think she was speaking the language of ordinary people.
But also on on another level, you take a Asian heritage woman from a high position, you put in an old white male Etonian. He's not that old. But what does that tell us?
I think the optics are terrible. I mean, I just don't know how you can get away with having four
percentage now of white, middle-class, privately school-educated men now in Sunak's cabinet?
Well, don't you worry, it'll be in the Daily Mail.
I want to hear about Kenny. Where's Kenny going?
Yeah, well, the reshuffle, we don't know what's happening with the reshuffle, how extensive it's going to be.
Therese Coffey's been in there a long time, clearly.
Maybe she is not accepting her fate.
Yeah,
because that does happen. You know what it's like sometimes.
People turn down jobs if they don't think they're suitable stature.
The deal was done with James Cleverly definitely yesterday. So when he walked to the cenotaph with his wreath as Foreign Secretary, who was he standing next to? The Home Secretary, Suella Braverman. Their last joint function together. Did she realise that in a few hours he was taking her job?
I heard fireworks last night, and I thought it was
Somebody's
Diwali.
leaving number 10?
No,
that's not a cabinet minister. No. I don't recognise him. That's a man with an umbrella.
So let's just think about this Therese Coffey, because this might be the next bit of news that breaks this morning if you're watching. I think people do care, because what I'm interested in is not that she loses her position as for the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, but what do they do with her?
Sack her. Put her on the back benches. She should pay a price for not getting to grips with that appalling issue of water companies willfully putting sewage into our waterways because it was easier for them to get a fine than to deal with those sewage properly.
Absolutely, which the Lib Dems are making huge play off in the blue wall.
And it's been chaotic for the Tories, and rightly so. And where was she on this? Nowhere.
And
she should have been
how do you solve a problem like Therese Coffey? I think that she has been unpopular ever since she was... She was
also Truss's deputy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Truss.
Yeah, and I hate to say it, she was an unlikely-looking health secretary.
That's what I was going to say, and I stopped. Because she was an unlikely-looking ambassador.
She smoked cigars, and she likes to drink.
Stay active, don't smoke, don't drink.
And she's very overweight, and that is not a great look for somebody when we've got obesity as the biggest problem in our NHS.
I'm not sure all the men who've ever held the role of health minister were exactly
he liked
images
a pint and a cigar, and I so used to enjoy lunch with Ken Clarke when he was health secretary. The cigar was out before we even had our staff.
Absolutely.
He was a great man. You'd have lunch with Ken Clarke and he'd say, should we have a drink at the bar first? He'd have 3 pints of beer, and I'd fall over after half. You know, those were the days.
I think, look, what are the papers going to make of this tomorrow? This is worth considering. I think it looks a little bit like, you know, when a soap opera is running out of popularity and it brings back a character from the dead, like Cindy from EastEnders got brought back because they weren't quite sure what else to do.
Is David Cameron the Bette Lynch of the cabinet?
I think this is more serious, because I think there is a genuine lack of talent. They're bringing people back not just because they're old popular actors. Lack of democracy. But who else could he bring in? I mean, that's really sad that he had to bring David Cameron back in. That he's just casting around.
I know. I mean, Jeremy Hunt has done the job
Cameron
before.
Was the overwhelming popular choice.
No. I know.
Where did he come from? What was he doing yesterday?
But also, Matthew, I was pointing out earlier in the programme, in his conference speech, which most people have forgotten, the one bit I haven't forgotten, he attacked the political orthodoxy of the last 30 years. That was Rishi Sunak. Who was part of that political orthodoxy for 6.5 of those years? David Cameron.
And even longer than that, because Cameron was a key Tory advisor back into the 80s. He was Thatcher at one point. He won general election.
He did, and I knew him when he was a young advisor to Norman Lamont singing in the bath over being kicked out of the exchange rate mechanism. And then he was an advisor to Michael Howard when he was Home Secretary. We can see David Cameron actually is walking into. We think these are older images, but he's presumably now at the Foreign Office, getting his feet under the table. It's a very, very
in the grandest office in Whitehall.
It is the grandest. It is much grander than the Prime Minister's office.
I really want to hear what you think at home. We've not got any emails to you. We've had so much to pack in of analysis, but gbviews@gbnews.com is the email address, because I'm dying to know what you at home
Are you for or against David Cameron, and are you for or against the sacking of Suella Braverman as Home Secretary, because she's gone. She's now a backbencher.
We haven't had any news bulletins since we've been on air at 9:30, but if you are just joining us, it is a huge day in politics. Suella Braverman, Home Secretary, has got the sack. She will now be a backbencher, replaced by James Cleverly, and in comes David Cameron. Stage left emerges. No one saw that coming. Let us know what you think. GB News.
As new poll shows, only 24% of the public like him. Only 24%.
That's right.
That's probably a bit more than Rishi.
Don't go anywhere. We're going to be here for the next hour, but let's get some very latest news headlines with Sophia.
Good morning. It's 11 o'clock. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB Newsroom. David Cameron is the new Foreign Secretary, marking a surprise return to government for the former Prime Minister. Leaving Downing Street moments ago, he praised the Prime Minister's leadership, despite disagreeing with some decisions. He replaces James Cleverly and will also be given a peerage. Mr Cleverly takes on the job of Home Secretary. That's after Suella Braverman was sacked by the Prime Minister earlier this morning, ending days of speculation. A reshuffle is now underway. Here are some pictures coming to us live from Downing Street, where Environment Secretary Therese Coffey walked inside a little while ago. Schools Minister Nick Gibb and Primary Care Minister Neil O'Brien have already announced their departures. Tory MP and GBNews presenter Jacob Rees-Mogg says the sacking of the former Home Secretary was the wrong move.
Mistake that Suella understands what the country thinks about migration, the concerns the country has, is serious about it, was determined to get it down. Sometimes she spoke in a way that others were a bit squeamish about, but that's not really the point. The point is that as Home Secretary, she was committed to delivering something that the country thinks is important.
As that reshuffle continues, the government is also working on strengthening police powers in the wake of the weekend's protests. Reports suggest the Prime Minister is looking to tighten laws to make it easier to ban marches and prosecute those glorifying terrorism. Police say 7 men have been charged with offences, including assault on an emergency worker, criminal damage and possession of an offensive weapon. Officers made a total of 145 arrests on Saturday. Armed Forces Minister James Heappey expressed his concern over intolerance in society.
Armistice Day weekend, Remembrance Sunday weekend, has been so politicised and so marred in violence. And I do think that that is something that should be a concern to us all. Our society has become rather intolerant of differing views.
To other news now, 5 people have died and 1 person is unaccounted for following a fire at a house in West London. Fire crews were called to the blaze in Chanel Close, Hounslow, last night. The London Fire Brigade say 5 people were pronounced dead at the scene, while 1 left the property and was taken to hospital. Police believe they were all members of the same family. The cause of the fire is being investigated. The World Health Organization says Gaza's main hospital is no longer functioning amid ongoing battles between Israeli forces and Hamas. The WHO's Director General says constant gunfire and bombings in the area have exacerbated the already critical circumstances at Gaza's Al-Shifa hospital. The medical complex has been damaged by Israeli airstrikes, according to Gaza-based Health Ministry. Israel says Hamas is using hospitals to cover for a command centre, which the terrorist group denies. A critically ill baby girl who has been at the centre of a legal battle has died after specialists withdrew life support treatment. 8-month-old Indy Gregory died in a hospice on Monday morning with her parents, who had wanted specialists to keep treating her. The couple had fought to overturn multiple court rulings, but were not successful. The parents say they're heartbroken and ashamed. Royal Mail has been fined £5.6 million for missing targets covering both first and second-class deliveries. Royal Mail's reported performance results over the last financial year showed that it had only delivered around 73% of first-class mail on time. Under the regulator's rules, Royal Mail is required to deliver 93% of first-class mail within 1 working day and 98.5% of second-class post within 3 working days. And we're looking at another stormy week with parts of the UK braced for gale force winds and heavy rain as Storm Debbie approaches. The storm will reach northern England and parts of North Wales soon, with gusts of up to 80 miles per hour possible along coastal areas. The storm developed off the Irish coast, where red weather warnings remain in place. This is GB News across the UK, on TV, in your car, on your digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now it's back to Andrew and Bev.
Well, we didn't see this coming. The former Prime Minister, David Cameron, that's right, David Cameron is our new Foreign Secretary. not a surprise move, a shock move. This is as Rishi Sunak reshuffles his cabinet, which means he'll have to be given a peerage and operate as Foreign Secretary from the House of Lords. It'll be the first time that's happened since Lord Carrington back in 1982, and the first time a former Prime Minister has come back into cabinet since 1970 and Douglas Hume. Just remind you, Rishi Sunak said he's the change Prime Minister.
They've had to do this, of course, because no one voted for David Cameron. Now, he says that while he's disagreed with, quote, some individual decisions made by Sunak, he believes that the Prime Minister is a strong and capable leader.
And in a morning of drama, the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, was sacked first thing after days of speculation over her future. James Cleverly, who had been Foreign Secretary, replaced her as Home Secretary.
So let's go to GBNews political editor Christopher Hope this morning. Chris, any significant reactions that you've seen so far around the world even? Because, of course, David Cameron, as we know, is very well known on the global stage.
Yeah. Well, with the ex-Prime Minister's Club, which is a growing band of former Tory MPs and other current Tory MPs, one of them has welcomed it, Theresa May, the former Prime Minister. She's welcomed David Cameron back into the fold, being in government, doing his bit here for public service. There is more news elsewhere in this reshuffle. It's getting bigger and bigger by the moment. Andrew and Bev. Jesse Norman, who's a junior minister in the Department for Transport, he has quit the government. He says in his letter here, undated letter, by the way, so clearly he had this lined up to put out there when there was a reshuffle, that he's made clear to the PM that he wanted to move on at some point, and now's a good moment. Jesse Norman is someone who many people saw as a possible future leader of the Tory party, but for him to leave government, I think, suggests that he may be drawing a curtain down on this part of his political career. Also, you heard you say earlier, Therese Coffey is still in Downing Street behind me. Now, that is linked to the reshuffle. I understand on senior source level that is linked to the reshuffle. Of course, meeting the PM early in a reshuffle, normally, Andrew and Bev, is bad news. So we don't know what it means yet. Normally also, those sackings are done behind closed doors by phone or in Parliament. So we can't quite work out why Therese Coffey went through the front door of Downing Street, but the view is it may not be good news. We don't know what it is yet, but it is linked to the reshuffle. That means that the Environment Secretary's job role could be up for grabs. Either she's promoted or she's moved out of government. That means this reshuffle is getting bigger and bigger through the morning.
And Chris, it could be, if she's in there still, that she's just simply not accepting her fate. If he's trying to fire her, she's resisting. How long can you resist for?
Yeah. Could well be. Therese Coffey, of course, is a close friend of Liz Truss. Ran Liz Truss's leadership campaign last year, with one campaign which, of course, was won with a 2/3, 1/3 majority amongst Tory party members. May feel that she is almost carrying the torch of Truss, if there's such a thing, in government. Yes, she may not want to go at all, and that may be part of the problem. And of course, the problem with reshuffles, Andrew, as you well know, there's a big whiteboard behind the scenes. They're moving names around that board, working out who can go where, and if someone won't go into the hole they've been given, whether it's out of the government or elsewhere in government, it causes all sorts of problems, like a big game of Jenga. If you pull the bricks out, it all might start tumbling down. And of course, we have seen issues, haven't we, with the authority of Mr. Sunak. He has got a notional majority of 80, down to about maybe 58, I think, now, with all the different defections and MPs being is it 50 now, with MPs being suspended and arrested. But even so, that's quite a healthy majority. But he does lack, I think, authority in the party, and this is his chance to put his imprint on the party. I am expecting more younger Tory MPs to be promoted, along the lines of Claire Coutinho in her late 30s. She's now, of course, the Net Zero Secretary. More people like her age to give a younger feeling towards this government. I was told by a senior ally of the PM they were going to break the glass ceiling with the appointments they're going to make in this reshuffle. That doesn't mean necessarily more women. It means more younger people. They're trying to reshape this team around Sunak to try and present them as youth going forward against an old man in the form of Sir Keir Starmer.
I was just looking at Keir Starmer's Twitter feed here, Chris. The last thing he tweeted was 21 hours ago. It was a picture of him laying a wreath at the cenotaph and saying it was an honour to lay the wreath today. We will remember them. What would you expect him to tweet this morning? He must be sitting there with his notepad and pen, trying to compose something that really does stick the knife in now to the Conservatives this morning. They've handed him a massive stick with which he can beat them, hasn't he?
So are you asking me on air to draft a tweet for Keir Starmer?
I'm asking you what you think. I'm asking
We're going to get you to do one.
I know you do it beautifully, Chris, but I'm asking you, what do you think he will come out? What can he make of this?
I think he'll say. What he'll say is he'll in PMQs on Wednesday he'll say, look around you, Prime Minister. Is not one MP in here good enough to be your Foreign Secretary? Are you out of ideas and out of even? Have you run out of MPs for top jobs? You brought back a guy who lost a referendum, a guy who's not trusted by the right of the party, a guy who's on the scrap heap of politics. Time for a new government. That's what he'll say.
All right, that's Chris Hope in Downing Street, and he'll stay with us with all the changes. We've got Charlie Rowley joining us now, who's a former advisor to Michael Gove. Charlie, what do you make about David Cameron coming back? How does that fit in with Rishi Sunak's pledge that I am the change Prime Minister? Well, he's gone back flipping years. We haven't had a former Prime Minister coming back into Cabinet since 1970, before you were even born, Charlie. Before Bev was born.
And before, I was just about to say, before probably either of you, I would have said before.
Say the nicest things.
Yeah.
What do you make of the appointment?
I think it's a brilliant appointment because whatever you think of David Cameron and his politics, and whatever side of the referendum debate you are on, he is a brilliant communicator. Yes. He is someone who I think had to take very, very tough decisions in 2010 to 2015, who led the country with the coalition, who, as I say, had to make very difficult decisions in terms of the economy, but won an overall majority. Because of the way he communicated those tough decisions, I think having him around the cabinet table will only be a good thing and excite people about looking at the Conservative Party once again.
No, I think you're completely wrong, Charlie. You say he was a good communicator. I think he was a very careful communicator. And what people like about Suella Braverman, those who did like her in that position, they like the fact that she actually shot from the hip and she wasn't such a careful communicator. And she did speak with a very strong, and I agree, controversial rhetoric around borders and also about homelessness. She got herself into hot water recently. That's what people like about her. They see David Cameron as just being too slick, too Eton, not genuine, don't they?
Well, I think the problem with Suella Braverman is that she went just too far. I think people absolutely believe and understand that there is a migration crisis in this country. When you're putting forward a new policy that is very difficult, like Rwanda, you need someone who can shoot from the hip, to say it how it is and to cut through, because that's what some voters, quite a lot of voters actually, think. But, talking about homelessness sometimes being a lifestyle choice, they wouldn't be words that I would have used, or I think the majority of people would have used. But elections are won by the centre ground. And if you develop a narrative that you are somehow becoming perhaps the nasty party, in inverted commas, a quote that's never really used, but you are seen to be attacking minority groups like the who are sleeping rough, or if you are being divisive, particularly in the run-up to very sensitive issues when it comes to protests in this country and remembrance services that we saw over the weekend, then I think it goes too far, and I think there was a frustration amongst middle ground voters that the Conservative Party was tacking too far to the right and wasn't representing the middle ground. David Cameron coming back into the fold is a very, very strong signal that this is a one-nation Conservative Party and a one-nation government once again.
Now, your boss, former boss Michael Gove, used to be very close friends with David Cameron, but they fell out spectacularly over Brexit because Cameron felt betrayed by Gove on Brexit. Gove will be disappointed, won't he, Charlie, that he didn't get the Home Secretary job. It's one you and I know he's coveted for years.
Well, just before tagging on to Michael, you will know that Oliver Dowden was David Cameron's chief of staff at Number 10, or certainly a very senior role in Number 10, if not chief of staff. So being Deputy Prime Minister, I think he would have had a huge influence, Oliver Dowden, bringing David Cameron back. But you're absolutely right. Michael has been a hugely successful cabinet minister in lots of cabinet posts. Never has been appointed to one of the big four, as they say: Defence Secretary, Foreign Secretary, Home Secretary, or Chancellor. I don't know whether he would have taken maybe policy. I mean, you wouldn't say no, I suppose, but I think he feels there's a huge mission still to do at levelling up, to level up the country, to get homes built for the country, and to make sure that local communities, local councils are funded properly. There is huge amounts of work still to be done in that regard, and I think Michael's just getting on with that job, as far as we know.
OK, thank you, Charlie. Former advisor to Michael Gove, Charlie Rowley. Sounded like he was in a canteen, looked like he was in a sauna. Don't know where he was.
And looked like he'd lost his razor blades. Wait, Michael Gove, is he getting a job in the reshuffle? Is he staying put, or is he going to be fired?
I wonder, and I have very much respect for Charlie, but I do not think that Gove would have hesitated for a second before leaping at the Foreign Secretary job.
Or Home Secretary.
But I wonder what Boris Johnson is thinking right now about all this as well.
He doesn't want to come back just yet. He wants to come back after the election is lost. That's when he'll come back, not before, my view.
And that's because it is just a merry-go-round of the same people, getting the same jobs, and we need better people in politics. Now, after being appointed Home Secretary, James Cleverly spoke to the press outside the Home Office. Let's have a listen.
Well, it's been a huge privilege to serve as Foreign Secretary, and in that time I worked very closely with my colleagues in the Home Office, cracking down on illegal migration, reducing the number of small boat arrivals, and now as the Home Secretary I'm absolutely committed to stopping the boats as we promised, but also making sure that everybody in the UK feels safe and secure going about their daily business, knowing that the government is here to protect them. So it's a fantastic job and it's a real privilege to serve. Thank you very much. Well, I intend to do this job in the way that I feel best protects the British people and our interests. I have had a very good conversation with the Prime Minister, who's made it very clear that he wants us to deliver on our promises, to stop the boats, to protect the British people, make sure everybody feels secure in their lives.
So that's the new Home Secretary, James Cleverly. We're hoping there might be some word soon with David Cameron, who has to get his period sorted out before he can become Foreign Secretary, because he's got to be able to answer questions in Parliament. What do you make, James Cleverly? I like him. I think he's a good bloke. And Rees-Mogg said to us earlier, Jacob Rees-Mogg said, everybody in Parliament likes him.
Yeah, I think he's respected across both sides, or all sides of the House.
But I don't know what his view is on Stop the Boats. I don't know.
Because he's very much a bit specialised in foreign defence hitherto. I mean, I think, in a sense, it will he'll calm things down.
Yes.
Which will be all, I think, part of this Sunak strategy. So I've just had a text from a Labour strategist saying, they've given up on Sunderland. This is all about Surrey. Because I really respect Charlie very much, but I think he's just wrong when he says about Cameron being a vote getter, because Cameron was a vote getter in different places to Boris. The places in the Red Wall had the chance to vote for Cameron twice, and they didn't on either occasion.
They did not. You're right.
When I worked for Ed Miliband, who was leader in 2015, we used to laugh at Cameron because we were going to all the traditional marginal seats in the Midlands and Yorkshire, and we'd see these pictures of Cameron sitting on a hay bale in the West Country.
Yeah,
and it was a very clever strategy, because if you remember, they got their majority in that election. Labour, actually, we lost lots of seats in Scotland to the SNP. We gained about 2 seats in England. But the reason that the scale of the defeat and why the Tories got a majority was because Cameron's strategy was all about the Lib Dems. And I think it's all about, if you're in those posh seats, it's all about, it was an embarrassment if you to vote Tory while Suella was saying all these horrible things, and now around the dinner party tables of Surrey and Hampshire, it's much more respectable.
They will send Cameron to campaign in all those seats. Yeah, he'll be back in his hay bale. That's a very good point.
Looking like a Bowden catalogue.
Yes, but you're also going to anger all of those Red Wall MPs who are now giving up, and those voters.
I think they've given up on them.
Well, I think they have, but it's all very well to say Cameron is a loyal, he's going to hold Sunak's hand, he's a loyal lieutenant, all of that. He needs to be a good foreign secretary, and he needs to not alienate half of the party. That's the problem with this appointment.
But that's so interesting. I love that, Matthew, that insight. They've given up on Sunderland, and this is all about Surrey. So who are the people in Sunderland going to vote for?
They'll go back to the Labour.
Well, I think hopefully a lot of them will come home to Labour, as we saw in the local elections. We did actually do very well in places.
We will, of course, the Tories will remind them that Keir Starmer was the architect of the second referendum plan, but they'll be hoping that Brexit's not an issue there.
Well, doesn't this weaken that, Andrew? Because, that was one of the key, because now you've got Cameron.
But it's such a risk, because a lot of those people who might have voted for Labour, those who want the stricter borders, they're going to vote for the reform.
They're going to vote for reform, and they're going to just split that vote.
Exactly.
That's how Labour Labour are going to get in now, isn't it? It's going to be... No one is pretending that Richard Tice is going to be our next Prime Minister, but we are going to shatter that vote, which Suella Braverman also does by detaching off a sort of floating righty.
But I think...
You're beginning to think now landslide territory.
Well, I think because one of the things with Cameron is, before I was a spin doctor, I used to write questions for those Sunday political interviews, and of course what we used to do is trail through all the old quotes. Can you just imagine all the tens of thousands of migration promised that Cameron's government made and failed? All that ammunition.
He was going to get migration down to the low tens of thousands. Legal migration last year was over 600,000.
That wasn't small boats down to the low 10,000.
No, that was legal.
All legal migration, absolutely. There's a lot to come back to haunt him.
Yeah,
right, we're going to carry on with our coverage of the Cabinet reshuffle. Our Home and Security Editor, Mark White, is outside the Home Office, but we're going to speak to him in just a moment. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with you three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
It's 11:24. You're with Britain's News on GB News. Andrew Pearson, Bev Turner.
Right, we're joined by our Home and Security Editor, Mark White, from outside the Home Office. Good morning, Mark. Hi. None of us really predicted this morning. Huge breaking news story today about Suella Braverman getting the sack. What's the very latest down there?
Well, it's blowing a storm here, I have to say, outside the Home Office, but James Cleverly is now in his office to start tackling the myriad of issues that, of course, as Home Secretary, he will have to deal with. He's left, of course, a job as Foreign Secretary that you would think, given all of the world events, there is no more complicated brief or complex brief than that. But the Home Office is certainly just that. And of course, this coming Wednesday, we have the decision on the Rwanda policy from the Supreme Court. And really, for the government, that Rwanda policy, it's Rwanda or bust. There is no, as far as we can make out, any plan B for what to do with those crossing the English Channel. It's all about sending a significant number to Rwanda to act as that deterrent. I think there is some small crumb of comfort for the new Home Secretary in that the small boat figures are down. They're about 27,000, 30% down or so on last year. It's arguable whether that's to do with the weather we've had over recent months or not, but at least they're down. And I think what's interesting as well is that, of course, James Cleverly is the MP for Braintree, and he was quite opposed to one of Suella Braverman's key policies, which was to put asylum seekers at RAF Wethersfield in Braintree Council's area. So we'll wait to see what James Cleverly says now with regard to that policy, whether he actually now supports that reluctantly or whether he might look for other solutions around that, knowing that he is the local MP and he's going to face an awful lot of opposition from many of his electorate.
We've just got the statement from David Cameron on Twitter, Mark, saying the Prime Minister has asked me to serve as his Foreign Secretary. I've gladly accepted. We're facing a daunting set of international challenges, including the war in Ukraine, the crisis in the Middle East at this time of profound global change. It has rarely been more important for this country to stand by our allies, strengthen our partnerships and make sure our voice is heard. He goes on and on and on. So why him for that role, Mark? What does he bring to those heavy international conflict situations?
Well, there's no doubt he is a statesman, former Prime Minister, I think widely respected around the world, and he will need all of those qualities in doing that job at a time when we have two raging wars, that war in Israel and, of course, the war in Ukraine that continues. So expect in very short order Lord Cameron to head off to Israel and then probably Ukraine to show that the British government is still fully committed, one, to its support of Israel as it pushes forward in its efforts to deal with Hamas, and also, of course, reiterating, as friends and allies do, the need for Israel to continue to have the civilian population in Gaza uppermost in its mind as it goes after Hamas on the ground. And then, of course, the issue of Ukraine, which continues to rumble on. It takes a lot of investment from this country and other allies of Ukraine. He will have to, as well as show President Zelensky that the UK is still fully committed to the cause and fully behind Ukraine. He will also have to make the argument internationally that this conflict in Ukraine is one that is still worth investment in, is still worth being full square behind Ukraine on.
Mark, we just want to ask you briefly, I know it's under lock and key, the Supreme Court. We hear on Wednesday. What happens on Wednesday? Do their lordships process into court and read out their views, or do we get it very quickly?
They'll come into court, it'll be televised, so they'll come into court and then you'll get at least some of the panel should be represented there as they read out the judgment. Now, my previous experience of listening to Supreme Court rulings is that they tend to be a bit more understandable than some of the Royal Courts of Justice and High Court rulings. They go out of their way to make sure that these judgments are sort of understandable for the vast majority of the public. So we should get an inkling from what they're saying who is going to be victorious on this. But as I say, for the new Home Secretary, for the UK government, there is so much riding on this because there is no plan B. If this goes against the government, they are going to have a long, hard look at what they do really going forward to deal with all those asylum seekers, all those people crossing the English Channel illegally in these small boats.
So that will be Cleverly's priority, the new Home Secretary's priority.
Yes, that and also, of course, dealing with the very significant numbers who are here. There are more than 50,000 people still being housed in hotels, and a key sort of task of the government is to try and get away from the over-reliance on these hotels and move them into the likes of purpose-built or specially adapted larger-scale centres such as Wethersfield, which the Home Secretary, as Foreign Secretary, was so opposed to, and such as Scampton, of course, up in Lincolnshire, or indeed the Bibby Stockholm barge down in Portland. So a lot on his plate, and we haven't even spoken about the ongoing issue of these protests that are continuing regularly throughout central London. I think in terms of repairing the damage with the Metropolitan Police, he won't have too much to do on that because that damage has been repaired in the sense that Suella Braverman, following her comments, has gone. So he can start with a clean slate there and maybe have a more constructive dialogue with Sir Mark Rowley about what we do with these protests and whether we get more in the way of new legislation that could make it that bit easier for the police to ban these marches, not in terms of the public order element of it, but because of the kind of a lot of the hate-filled rhetoric that's coming out of there and the fear and alarm that it's putting one community, the Jewish community, under.
OK, thank you, Mark. Such a good point.
Very good point.
I mean, loads of good points. Which one do we
and we
choose?
shouldn't forget the Home Secretary, again, third time running, is a character of ethnic origin. His mother is from Sierra Leone. That is our new Home Secretary, James Cleverly.
Right, we're going to get to your emails, I promise you. I know you've been sending them in. We've been ever so busy here this morning since 9:30. Huge changes at the top of government. Let's hear the very latest, first of all, though, with Sophia.
It's 11:32. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB Newsroom. New Foreign Secretary Lord David Cameron said that while I may disagree with some individual decisions made by Rishi Sunak, he is a strong and capable Prime Minister who is showing exemplary leadership at a difficult time.
As the Home Secretary, I'm absolutely committed to stopping the boats, as we promised, but also making sure that everybody in the UK feels safe and secure going about their daily business, knowing that the government is here to protect them. So it's a fantastic job and it's a real privilege to serve.
And that was the new Home Secretary, James Cleverly, speaking. As that reshuffle continues, the government is also working on strengthening police powers in the wake of this weekend's protests. Reports suggest the Prime Minister is looking to tighten laws to make it easier to ban marches and prosecute those glorifying terrorism. Police say 7 men have been charged with offences including assault on an emergency worker, criminal damage and possession of an offensive weapon. Officers made a total of 145 arrests on Saturday. Armed Forces Minister James Heappey expressed his concern over intolerance in society. And you can get more on all those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
For exclusive, limited edition and rare gold coins that are always newsworthy, Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
And here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2249 and €1.1456. And the price of gold is £1,582 and 85 pence per ounce. And the FTSE 100's at 7,412 points.
Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Good morning, it's 7:34. Still to come, we are going to hear what you've been saying at home about this huge morning of political news. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only three people you can trust in life: your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquia, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth. It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is two new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
It is 11:38 with Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Andrew Pearson, Bev Turner, and before we go, your views are pouring in. But we should just recap where we are. So, the Home Secretary's been fired, that's Suella Braverman, replaced by the Foreign Secretary, that is James Cleverly.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
I thought
James Cleverly.
Sorry.
And the Foreign Secretary is now, wait for this.
I was waiting for this. So this is Suella Braverman's statement.
Yeah.
She has said, "It has been the greatest privilege of my life to serve as Home Secretary, and I will have more to say in due course."
That's ominous, isn't it? And her replacement, James Cleverly, who was Foreign Secretary, tweeted in response to his appointment, "It's an honour to be appointed as Home Secretary. The goal is clear. My job is to keep people in this country safe."
It doesn't sound terribly terribly happy about it, does he? He said in the summer that he loved being Foreign Secretary and he wanted to keep that job. David Cameron, he wrote an essay. The Prime Minister has asked me to serve as his Foreign Secretary and I've gladly accepted. We're facing a daunting set of international challenges, he says, including the war in Ukraine and the crisis in the Middle East. At this time of profound global change, it has rarely been more important for this country to stand by our allies, strengthen our partnerships and to make sure our voice is heard.
Well, let's see what you've been saying.
That's actually a third of what he had to say.
Yeah.
We've cut it off for you.
Let's see what you've been saying at home. Tina says, Cameron, are you joking? He turned his back on the country when he didn't get his way over Europe. We're going backwards. And Leslie says, I'm disgusted and outraged by Suella being sacked. The only one who stood for what the British public wanted, wasn't afraid to say it, a true Conservative. We're doomed. We'll soon be living in a communist country.
Well, Sue has said, speechless. If the Conservatives have not already lost the election, they have now. Suella Braverman is the only one that speaks for the silent majority. Neville from Bristol said, what a disaster for the Conservative Party in our country. The person who should resign is the Charlie Chaplin lookalike Prime Minister, constantly saying one thing, then doing the other, the complete opposite the next day. A gutless man.
But somebody's being positive. Patrick says, if David Cameron accepts, and he has, Patrick says it's a brilliant move.
You're all talking about the silent majority. Mike says, what a shame. She spoke for the silent majority of Conservatives. We're now left with a load of wimps. There was something about her very strong rhetoric, particularly on immigration. It was a kind of old-school, tough love approach, and you like it out there.
And she refused to pull back. She said what she thought, and I think she spoke the language which a lot of ordinary people related to. Emma,
I like that.
Particularly the comments about policing. I think they were particularly resonant. I don't think she was that popular, actually, until the past week. I don't think she was overwhelmingly loved by people, Suella Braverman. I think she was sort of she's quite a spiky figure. She doesn't really resonate with people. But honestly, with the policing comments, I think a lot of people have been feeling this sense that the policing wasn't being equal, that the left,
policing.
that there were double standards, that it was woke policing, but also just that the liberal left were getting away, that woke were getting away with a lot. There was a lot of hate coming from that side, and I think those comments have catapulted her from being just another Home Secretary to being an extremely popular figure now.
And she I mean, Matthew, her opposite number is Yvette Cooper, one of the more on the Labour front bench, one of the few who's got cabinet experience, if perhaps the only one who's got cabinet experience. I'm struggling to think of any others.
I think you might be right. She's the only one who's got cabinet. Oh, Hilary Benn.
Hilary Benn, but she
brought her back in Northern Ireland.
totally eclipsed Yvette Cooper.
Well, I mean, Yvette plays quite a quiet game. Some might argue a little bit too quiet. Sometimes there's rumblings, particularly with people in the red wall that is still red, MPs from those constituencies, that they'd like to hear Yvette be a bit stronger. Stephen Kinnock, who's her deputy, has been making and the shadow immigration minister has been making the run. Labour does have a plan on the small boats. I feel I talk about it more than Yvette does sometimes.
To let them all in?
Not at all. To stop them. A 5-point plan to stop them. But let's not go down that rabbit hole. But on the politics of it, I think that people feel that Yvette doesn't go out and sell that enough because she doesn't want to alienate liberal opinion. So this makes Yvette's life easier.
Lots along this lines, Emma. I'm just looking at what people at home are saying. Pat has said after the sacking of Suella, the Conservative Party has 100% just lost another 50 votes from our families. Is Rishi Sunak a Labour supporter in disguise? Let's hope that Suella joins the Reform Party. Lots of people.
She won't do that because she wants to lead the Tory party.
What will she do, though? But I think just responding to Matthew, in terms of how Starmer responds to this, it's going to be tricky for him as well when he attacks David Cameron, because Brexit is not a straightforward issue for Labour as well.
Certainly not.
I think he's going to have to be really careful. He can't just... I mean, Chris Hope was saying, well, he'll stand up and say, you've got a dearth of talent, you've had to bring back an old guy, don't you have anyone better? And that's one way of doing it. But what else will Starmer say? How will he handle this issue of democracy? But how will he handle the issue of Brexit and the referendum, all of which were not simple for Labour either?
Very uncomfortable.
Well, I think they'll be trying to hope that the very fact that Cameron's there means the Tories will be using that attack line less. I mean, the word I'm getting from the Labour spin doctors is that they're really going on the fact that this destroys any notion that Sunak is the change candidate, which is what he tried to do in his conference speech.
Well, I don't think many people noticed him even saying it, really.
But, I mean, I think that's what was thought to set the Tory strategy. And, of course, I know sometimes I get groans when I say it on GB News, but the 13 years of failure, Labour is biggest cock-a-hoop that the man who started those 13 years of failure is now back in the frame. And in a sense, it enables Labour to push back and say, remember this? One other thing, of course, is how many times is Cameron going to be asked, you believed in austerity, and now you've got a spend government, which can be asked from the right. And there's also one interesting line, which I'm hearing, is that the Labour think they'll be disquiet on the Tory backbenchers about how close to China Cameron is.
Well,
this has become a big issue for Tory backbenchers.
Yeah, and remember, it was Boris Johnson's government that yanked all the Chinese stuff out of the 5G.
Absolutely, and the nuclear power stations as well.
And all that, and yet Cameron has been over to China quite a lot.
I'm sure, because he's had quite a lot of time on his hands as his business interests collapsed, literally.
And his mate Osborne likewise.
Exactly. I mean, it seems like a different a lifetime ago, because the government pursued in the early days, still misguided, but a different set of misguided policies. So I think all of that will build up to Labour will attack the contradictions between Cameron and Sunak, not just on China, but also on the ECHR, where Cameron kept in. It makes it more difficult to leave the European Convention on Human Rights, but also, of course, as we said just a couple of weeks ago, HS2.
There's no way a European Convention on Human Rights is going to be. The Foreign Secretary, the new Foreign Secretary, will be fourth square opposed to that.
Yeah, well, all eyes on Wednesday. It's true. There's so much history there for Cameron for everything. I mean, everybody's raking it all up, and it's all going to be thrown at Rishi Sunak, isn't it?
Honestly, the reaction on Twitter to David Cameron's statement. I mean, the British people, they're just brilliant, aren't they? I mean, there's so much in here in terms of humour. People saying, so an absolute loser brings back the absolute loser that gave him the seat. Are you going to fix all the mess that you started as Prime Minister? People aren't stupid. They know that when Rishi Sunak talks about the fact that he's the change candidate, he's brought back David Cameron, who was, he say, was...
And austerity was so unpopular. I mean, Cameron, in a sense, was the poster boy for austerity.
Yeah.
He's the man who cut your library, your swimming pool, etc. in those days when they were trying to balance the books.
So the left are basically saying he's a tough Tory. You've got the right saying that he's socially liberal and he sold out Brexit. You've got sort of centre people who hate him because of Brexit. And then you go, who is left? I think, Matthew, the only people we can identify are the ones you said, which is the sorry crowd.
Yeah, and I think I think that the idea that he suddenly reconnects you with liberal Britain, as it were, is
We've
rather
had enough of liberal Britain.
Well, yeah, but this, I mean, they clearly want, they've put him back thinking that they're going to do this. They're going to make voting Tory respectable again. I'm not sure that people who, I don't think he keeps either camp happy, because I think people who were in favour of staying in, the Remainers, will have long memories.
But you know, if all these decisions are taken, they sit down and they plot and they plot and they scheme all the negatives, all the positives. Yeah. So someone said to Sunak, on balance, the positives outweigh the negatives.
It's the least worst option, and that shows us in what a desperate situation the Tories are in that this is the best they can come up with, and this is the least worst option.
And it really, as I said before, it calls into the Sunak's judgment. It really calls that into question. Did they not even kind of game plan this a little bit? Bev's point about the lack of accountability, the fact that he's not even going to be in the chamber, all the other issues.
And is there an element, though, that being Prime Minister is a lonely job, and he feels he's got now a big beast he can talk to?
Well, absolutely. I think that is the advantage. And to use the famous Thatcher phrase, everyone needs a Willie, referring to Willie Whitelaw, who is the experienced Deputy Prime Minister. Oliver Dowden, who is the Deputy Prime Minister in this government, is hardly that. I think they were literally certainly prefects together. So in a sense, he's brought that back. My argument with Vistama is actually that Labour somewhat lacks that at the moment. In my day, behind the scenes, was Charlie Faulkner.
Yeah, who's the Willie... And he's not around now.
No, and Charlie's
who's the Willie Whitelaw in your...
I'm not sure that they have one in quite the same way. I was glad they brought, but I think Sue Gray, who's the official, who's now running the Starmer operation. But you need somebody who's been in politics for that, who's got political antennae as well as others.
Hasn't Rishi Sunak made himself lonely in that role? Hasn't he?
By just promoting his mates.
That he's only he's got rid of people who didn't necessarily agree with him. Had a very, very small circle around him of people who agree with him.
Because you need people to say the same thing.
As though he's much closer to his family than he is to his cabinet.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, it's not good enough to say that yes, Cameron will be his kind of loyal lieutenant. That's not good enough. David Cameron needs to be a decent foreign secretary in his own right. Get on with that job.
Yeah.
Yes.
He's also his cabinet secretary is very young and inexperienced. Simon Case, who's actually on sick leave too. So you just say sense that King Sunak is almost...
But
feels
his
a bit like King
political
Canute.
judgment is out. His political judgment is way
Absolutely.
out from the last 10 hours.
And Labour are already
What was he
saying that he's
thinking?
put party before country. This was about balancing out the party's needs and the party's electoral calculations rather than putting the country first.
But Prime Ministers always do that.
Well, they should pretend. At least they try and prevail that they're not. If they're skillful. And I don't think they're skillful enough.
They would say that, Labour,
The
wouldn't they?
Suella Braverman situation catapulted him into a panic, and I think he's made some really, really odd decisions this morning.
It's not as if this came as a surprise that she started speaking that way, Suella Braverman.
We've had quite a few.
This has been building up and building up and building up, so he should have been ready.
He should have been ready.
But I think this has been, I'm sure...
But this is a hallmark.
This has been marinating
This is a hallmark
4 weeks.
of Sunak's leadership, is that he lets things drift and he lets things drift and then he makes a decision, and it usually seems to be the wrong one.
Do you know why this also casts Rishi Sunak in a weak light? It's because it looks like he needs the guy that used to do the job to come in and be both his friend and ally and advisor, because he's drowning in
To
it.
hold his hand.
Who's older than him, taller than him. I mean, I know it's a silly thing to think about,
Such
but
a
the
good
pictures are
point.
going to look...
Cameron is over 6 foot.
Yes, Cameron's over 6 foot.
People forget that. He is a big, impressive figure of a man. And I have to say, Cameron, when he walks in a room, there is an aura about him. There always was. In the way there isn't, I'm afraid, with Keir Starmer. You don't even notice when he's walked in a room. But also, I'm afraid, it's a bit difficult with the Prime Minister. You don't always notice in the room because you can't see him.
Can't see him. I remember watching the conference speech and we weren't sure whether he was at the podium yet. A woman can say it. We get so much sexism
I'll get
every
cancelled.
day.
But one thing that I think is interesting to watch this afternoon is whether he promotes, in what was probably the final reshuffle before the election, just promotes his mates. So people like Claire Cortina, who the public have never heard of, but is a great mate of his, or whether he brings some other older, wiser people back in.
I still think he's got to get rid of the Chancellor, because the Tories need a Tory Chancellor, not a Chancellor who, frankly, would not be out of place.
Well, his best mates, Cameron and Hunt, are really good mates. They were very close in opposition.
They were, I know they were, but I think they need a Tory Chancellor who's going to take the plunge and say, I'm cutting taxes.
Well, Jeremy Hunt will do what's right for Jeremy Hunt, is my suspicion.
Well, he's going to lose his seat.
This is all getting quite late.
Jeremy Hunt's
he
going
needs to pull his party back together.
We've got the autumn statement next week.
This is not going to save Jeremy Hunt's seat. His constituency's been split in half. It's going to be the Liberal Democrats by a country mile.
I think it'd be very dangerous to get rid of Jeremy Hunt and Suella Braverman on the same day.
Yeah.
I don't think he'll be going. I think he'll wait until after the autumn statement.
No, I think
next week.
Next week, and they will have to. There's 2 big events in the next couple of weeks. Aren't you lucky to have GB News at a time like this?
Well, we have Wednesday, the Supreme Court, and then the Wednesday after we have the autumn statement, which is effectively like a budget, where he can announce tax cuts. And you must, Chancellor, because we know you're watching this programme, you've got to cut taxes.
Got to. You've got to.
For the sake of the country, not for the sake of the Tory party, for the sake of the country, because we've got the biggest tax burden in this country since the Second World War, and that should never have happened on a Tory watch.
That is...
higher than any Labour government.
Higher, I accept that. It's unacceptable.
It's a huge own goal for the Labour Party at the moment, isn't it? I mean, we could just literally throw kind of...
But they don't. And I'm sorry, they don't.
Opposition don't win elections, government lose them.
Oh, well,
and I'm still sat here, and this is what I was saying, Matthew, about the fact that Keir Starmer fails to cash in on these situations or make any sort of merit out of it. I don't think he still hasn't tweeted. He still hasn't tweeted.
He'll wait for the reshuffle.
Yeah, he'll wait for the reshuffle. I mean, David Lammy has come out.
No, but that's wrong, because we are talking about it right now. We've been talking about it since 9:30 this morning.
What's David Lammy said?
We could have said what Keir Starmer said. He said nothing.
I think a tweet would be a good idea.
So what's David Lammy said? That
Lammy has said
intellectual powerhouse,
who's of course the shadow now of David Cameron, is the last gasp act of desperation from a government devoid of talent and ideas amid international crisis. Sunak has chosen an unelected failure from the past.
It's right for him to speak out because, of course, at the dispatch box, he will not be able to debate with David Cameron, the Foreign Secretary. And that is part of a democratic deficit, which will be heavily criticised, rightly.
Rightly so.
And the question is, who will take questions in the Commons?
The Deputy Shadow Foreign Secretary, whoever that is.
Well, at the moment, it looks like... there's talk that Andrew Mitchell, who's the international development minister, who is quite a senior figure, former chief whip, etc., will be the
well
number 2 in the
respected.
Commons.
Why not have made him? Then why not have done
exactly.
that? Why not
he's been elected.
put him in to
We have to stop talking. We have to stop talking.
Sinister.
Up next, it's GB News Live with Pip Thompson, Emily Carver. What's coming up on your show? I wonder if can guess. Anything to do with the reshuffle, guys?
Andrew, guess what we're going to be talking about? But there is still plenty to be talking about, because with this reshuffle, we know plenty of people who are out, But we need to know more about who is in. Is the Health Secretary Steve Barclay still going to remain in post, for example?
Yes, and Therese Coffey, she's been in number 10, hasn't she? So we want to know what's going on with her, and also want to hear from our viewers and listeners what they make of David Cameron returning to Cabinet.
Yeah, that was quite an announcement. Plus, we're live in Manchester for the funeral of Man U and England legend Sir Bobby Charlton.
Well, we can't wait for that. It's going to be great. So stay tuned to GB News all day because the reshuffle is continuing and we will give you all the latest. We are first with the news, always, of course.
And make sure you're back with us tomorrow morning because there's going to be a lot of fallout from this. Anything could happen at the moment. Let's face it, we'll be back at 9:30 tomorrow morning. But until then, we'll hand over to Pip and
See you then.
Emily. Have a great day.
I'm Alex Deakin. This is your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. Storm Debbie is affecting some parts of the UK today, named by Met Éireann, the Irish Weather Service, but providing some very strong gusts of wind over parts of northwest England. The storm itself heading into Scotland, but the strongest winds where the isobars are squeezing together here over parts of northern England and North Wales. An amber warning in place for northwest England, but other yellow warnings are also in place for wind and rain as that storm system moves through. A very wet and blustery afternoon over northern England, gusts of 60, 70 miles an hour on the coast of northwest England, maybe even a little bit more. And inland, those gusts could cause some disruption as well. Blustery in the south with a mixture of sunshine and a few scattered showers. The rain in eastern Scotland will continue through the day and into this evening. It should start to ease overnight, but still potentially causing further problems. More showers then packing in across the central parts of the UK. Some clearer spells in the east, and then we're looking down to the southwest with some very heavy rain coming in here by dawn. Temperature-wise, mostly holding up in double digits across the far south, single figures further north, a little chilly in northern Scotland. But a very wet start for parts of southern England tomorrow. Not lasting long, but this band of rain will be pretty intense with some very gusty winds and may cause some issues during the morning rush hour before that scoots away. And then again, we're left with showers, plenty of them across Scotland, Northern Ireland, and some decent spells of sunshine in the afternoon across the south. But still, most places pretty breezy.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Ah!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me.